The word barbarian carries such weight in modern discourse that we rarely pause to examine its origins, yet understanding this term proves essential to grasping how ancient civilizations viewed themselves and their neighbours. The concept emerged not from objective observation but from the peculiar acoustic sensibilities of the ancient Greeks, who coined the term barbaros to describe anyone whose speech sounded like meaningless bar sounds to their ears. This onomatopoetic origin reveals the fundamentally ethnocentric nature of the designation from its inception. It described not inherent savagery or cultural inferiority, but simply the experience of hearing unfamiliar languages. Greek usage of barbaros initially carried no moral judgment. Herodotus, writing in the 5th century BC, employed the term descriptively when discussing Persians, Egyptians and Scythians, without suggesting these peoples lacked civilization or sophistication. The Persians, after all, commanded a vast empire with advanced administrative systems, monumental architecture and refined court culture. Egyptian civilization predated Greek development by millennia, boasting achievements in mathematics, medicine and engineering that Greeks themselves acknowledged and studied. Herodotus recognized these accomplishments while still categorizing these peoples as barbaroi, based purely on linguistic difference. The semantic evolution of barbaros accelerated during the Persian Wars of the early 5th century BC. As Greek city-states fought for survival against Xerxes' massive invasion force, the term began acquiring political and cultural connotations beyond its original linguistic meaning. Victory at Marathon, Salamis and Plataea transformed barbarian from a neutral descriptor into a rallying cry that distinguished Greek freedom from Persian despotism, Greek rationality from barbarian excess, Greek moderation from barbarian luxury. This transformation reflected genuine cultural differences the Greeks observed. Persian court rituals requiring prostration before the king struck Greeks as servile, while Persian displays of wealth appeared ostentatious compared to Greek ideals of restraint. Aristotle formalized these distinctions in his political philosophy, arguing that some peoples were naturally suited for slavery while Greeks possessed inherent capacities for self-governance. His theories provided intellectual justification for viewing barbarians as fundamentally different in nature rather than merely culture. This philosophical framework proved enormously influential, establishing patterns of thought that would persist for centuries. Aristotle's student Alexander the Great complicated these categories through his conquests, adopting Persian customs and encouraging cultural fusion, yet even Alexander's cosmopolitan vision maintained Greek cultural superiority as its foundation. Roman encounters with the Greek concept of barbarism initially placed Romans themselves in the barbarian category. Early Greek writers dismissed Roman culture as crude and derivative, their language harsh compared to melodious Greek, their customs primitive compared to refined Hellenic traditions. This classification stung Roman pride and motivated intense efforts to demonstrate cultural sophistication worthy of Greek respect. Romans studied Greek literature, philosophy and art with remarkable dedication, eventually surpassing their teachers in certain fields while maintaining fierce pride in distinctly Roman achievements. Roman adoption of the barbarian concept transformed it into something far more systematic and politically useful than its Greek predecessor. Where Greeks applied the term somewhat inconsistently based on cultural prejudices and immediate political circumstances, Romans developed a more structured understanding that served imperial administration. The Roman version of barbarism became a tool for justifying conquest, organising provincial governance, and maintaining social hierarchies throughout their expanding territories. Julius Caesar's commentaries on the Gallic Wars demonstrate this Roman transformation of the barbarian concept. Caesar described Gallic tribes with ethnographic precision, noting their military capabilities, political structures and religious practices. His accounts reveal peoples with complex societies, skilled metalworking, sophisticated fortifications and effective military organisation. Yet Caesar consistently portrayed these achievements as evidence of barbarian potential that required Roman guidance to reach full development. Gallic druids possessed learning and authority, but their human sacrifices marked them as savage. Gallic warriors showed courage and skill, but their lack of discipline made them inferior to Roman legions. Celtic craftsmanship produced beautiful objects, but Roman engineering created lasting monuments. Caesar's descriptions served multiple purposes beyond simple military reporting. They justified Roman intervention as a civilizing mission, while simultaneously warning Roman readers about barbarian capabilities. The Helvetii possessed enough organisation to plan massive migrations. The Belgae commanded confederations spanning vast territories. Germanic tribes across the Rhine threatened Gallic stability with their warrior culture and land hunger. These portrayals emphasised both barbarian inferiority and barbarian danger, creating a narrative framework that made Roman conquest appear both beneficial and necessary. Tacitus refined this approach in his ethnographic works, particularly the Germania, which provided Romans with their most detailed account of Germanic peoples. Tacitus wrote with literary skill and anthropological insight, describing Germanic social structures, religious practices, and daily life with remarkable detail. Germanic warriors bound themselves to chiefs through personal loyalty rather than state authority. Germanic women enjoyed higher status than their Roman counterparts, participating in religious ceremonies and influencing political decisions. Germanic tribes valued personal honour above material wealth, preferring death to dishonour in battle. These observations contained implicit criticisms of Roman society, where Tacitus saw corruption, luxury, and moral decay replacing the virtues that had built the empire. Germanic simplicity contrasted favourably with Roman complexity, Germanic authenticity with Roman artificiality, Germanic freedom with Roman servitude to emperors. Yet Tacitus never abandoned the fundamental barbarian framework. Germanic virtues remained primitive and undeveloped compared to Roman civilization at its best. Germanic courage lacked Roman discipline. Germanic freedom lacked Roman law. Germanic simplicity lacked Roman culture. Herodotus had established patterns of barbarian description that later writers followed and refined. His accounts of Scythian customs, their mobile lifestyle, their ritual practices, their resistance to Persian conquest, created templates for understanding nomadic peoples. Scythians lived in wagons rather than cities, worshipped strange gods with unusual ceremonies, and fought with tactics that confounded conventional armies. These characteristics became standard elements in barbarian descriptions, applied to various peoples regardless of their actual diversity. The Scythian example proved particularly influential because it demonstrated barbarian military effectiveness against civilized powers. Darius the Great's failed invasion of Scythia showed that barbarian warfare could defeat Persian imperial forces through mobility, knowledge of terrain, and unconventional tactics. This lesson resonated with later Roman observers facing similar challenges from Germanic tribes, Dacians, and other peoples who refused to fight according to Mediterranean military conventions. Roman historians expanded these descriptive patterns into comprehensive frameworks for understanding barbarian societies. Barbarians lived in forests, mountains, or steppes rather than cities. They practiced polygamy, human sacrifice, or other customs that violated Roman moral standards. They lacked written laws, formal education, and permanent architecture. They valued warfare above peaceful pursuits, personal loyalty above legal obligation, and tribal identity above universal citizenship. These characteristics appeared consistently in Roman descriptions of diverse peoples from Britain to Mesopotamia, suggesting systematic application of preconceived categories rather than careful observation of actual differences. The political utility of barbarian classification became most apparent in Roman legal and administrative practices. Roman law distinguished between citizens, allies, and barbarians with different rights, obligations, and protections. Barbarian status justified enslavement, territorial conquest, and cultural suppression, while simultaneously offering pathways to civilization through Roman tutelage. Successful barbarian leaders could earn Roman citizenship, barbarian warriors could serve in auxiliary units, and barbarian territories could achieve provincial status through demonstrated loyalty and cultural adaptation. This system created incentives for barbarian peoples to adopt Roman customs while maintaining clear hierarchies that preserved Roman superiority. A Gallic aristocrat might wear Roman dress, speak Latin, and serve Roman administration while remaining fundamentally barbarian in Roman eyes until formal citizenship was granted. Even then, recently civilized barbarians faced suspicion and discrimination from established Roman families who questioned their cultural authenticity and political reliability. Archaeological evidence reveals the complexity of these cultural interactions, showing extensive trade networks, artistic influences, and technological exchanges between Roman and barbarian territories. Roman goods appeared in Germanic settlements far beyond imperial borders. Barbarian craftsmanship influenced Roman decorative styles. Military equipment and techniques spread in both directions across cultural boundaries. These material exchanges suggest relationships far more nuanced than simple civilized versus barbarian opposition. Yet literary sources consistently maintained rigid categorical distinctions that obscured actual complexity. The persistence of barbarian stereotypes reflects their usefulness for maintaining social cohesion and political authority within classical civilizations. External threats unified internal populations, foreign customs validated domestic practices, and cultural superiority justified political dominance. These functions remained constant even as specific barbarian peoples changed, disappeared, or achieved civilized status themselves. New barbarians always appeared to replace those who had been conquered, converted, or assimilated, maintaining the essential framework that distinguished civilization from its alternatives. Modern scholarship has revealed the extent to which classical sources shaped enduring misconceptions about ancient European peoples. Archaeological investigations show sophisticated societies with complex political structures, advanced technologies, and rich cultural traditions among peoples dismissed as primitive barbarians by Greek and Roman writers. The Celts developed intricate legal systems, astronomical knowledge, and artistic traditions of remarkable sophistication. Germanic peoples created elaborate social hierarchies, extensive trade networks, and religious practices of considerable complexity. Thracians, Dacians, and other Balkan peoples built fortified cities, minted coins, and maintained diplomatic relations across vast distances. These revelations about classical bias prove particularly significant when examining the Celts, whose civilization represented one of Europe's most sophisticated prehistoric cultures, yet suffered systematic misrepresentation in Greco-Roman sources. By the 8th century BC, Celtic peoples had begun their remarkable expansion across the European continent, establishing settlements from the Atlantic shores of Ireland to the highlands of central Anatolia. This expansion occurred not through massive military campaigns like later Roman conquests, but through gradual migration, trade relationships, and cultural diffusion that created a vast Celtic world united by shared languages, artistic traditions, and religious practices. The Latin culture, named after the Swiss archaeological site where distinctive Celtic artifacts were first systematically studied, flourished from approximately 450 BC to the Roman conquest of Gaul. Latene metalwork demonstrates technical mastery that rivals any contemporary civilization. Celtic smiths developed advanced techniques for working iron and bronze, creating weapons, tools, and decorative objects of extraordinary quality. Their long swords, forged from high-carbon steel with pattern-welded blades, proved superior to Roman gladii in individual combat. Celtic shields, constructed from wood and leather with iron bosses, featured intricate decorative patterns that served both aesthetic and spiritual purposes. Celtic artistic achievement extended far beyond functional metalwork into realms of pure aesthetic expression. The distinctive curvilinear style that characterises Latin art combined geometric precision with organic flowing forms that seem to capture natural movement in static bronze and stone. Celtic artisans created torques, twisted metal neck rings, of remarkable sophistication, some weighing several pounds, and featuring terminals carved with faces, animals, or abstract designs of stunning complexity. The Gundestrup cauldron, discovered in Denmark but clearly of Celtic manufacture, displays narrative scenes of gods, warriors, and ritual activities rendered with artistic skill that demonstrates profound mythological knowledge and technical expertise. Archaeological evidence reveals Celtic settlements far more complex than the simple villages described in Roman sources. The great hill fort of Maiden Castle in Dorset covered 47 acres within multiple defensive ramparts that rose over 100 feet above the surrounding countryside. These ramparts, constructed through sophisticated engineering techniques, incorporated timber-laced stone walls that could withstand prolonged siege warfare. Within such fortifications, Celtic communities maintained organised street layouts, specialised craft workshops, and storage facilities that indicate centralised planning and social hierarchy. The Oppida fortified towns that emerged across Celtic Europe during the 2nd and 1st centuries BC represented urban development comparable to contemporary Mediterranean cities. Bibracte, the capital of the Aeduan Gaul, covered over 300 acres and housed an estimated 10,000 inhabitants. Streets paved with stone connected residential districts, craft quarters, and ceremonial areas. Workshops produced goods for long-distance trade, including glassware, pottery, and metalwork that reached markets from Britain to the Black Sea. Coinage minted at Bibracte and other Oppida demonstrates Celtic adoption and adaptation of Mediterranean monetary systems, with designs that blend classical motifs with distinctly Celtic artistic elements. Celtic social organisation operated through complex hierarchical structures that balanced aristocratic authority with communal decision-making. At the apex stood warrior nobles who derived status from military prowess, cattle ownership, and the ability to attract and maintain armed retainers. These aristocrats lived in substantial timber halls within fortified compounds, surrounded by craftsmen, servants, and agricultural workers who provided the economic foundation for Celtic society. Warrior bands bound by personal loyalty to aristocratic leaders formed the military core of Celtic communities, similar to the comitatus system later observed among Germanic peoples. The Druids occupied a unique position within Celtic society that combined religious, legal, and educational functions. These learned men, and occasionally women, underwent training periods lasting up to 20 years, memorising vast bodies of oral tradition that included religious doctrine, legal precedents, historical genealogies, and astronomical knowledge. Druids served as judges in legal disputes, conducting trials according to customary law that covered everything from property rights to criminal punishment. Their decisions carried authority across tribal boundaries, creating a unified legal system that transcended political divisions. Druidical education centred on memorisation rather than written texts, preserving Celtic traditions through oral transmission that ensured cultural continuity across generations. Young Druids learned to recite thousands of verses containing religious hymns, legal formulations, and historical narratives. This system produced individuals with prodigious memories capable of preserving complex information with remarkable accuracy. Archaeological discoveries of wooden tablets with Ogham inscriptions suggest Druids possessed knowledge of writing systems, but deliberately chose oral preservation for sacred knowledge, believing written texts lack the spiritual power of spoken words. Celtic religious practices centred on the natural world, with sacred groves, springs, and hilltops serving as primary ceremonial sites. The Druids conducted elaborate rituals marking seasonal transitions, agricultural cycles, and important community events. These ceremonies often involved animal sacrifice, with specific animals chosen according to the nature of the ritual and the deities being honoured. Archaeological evidence from sites like Gournay-sur-Aronde reveals structured deposits of weapons, jewellery, and animal remains that indicate systematic ritual practices conducted over extended periods. Human sacrifice, while documented in classical sources and supported by archaeological evidence, occurred within specific religious contexts rather than as random violence. Bog bodies discovered across Celtic territories show evidence of ritual killing conducted according to prescribed methods, strangulation, throat cutting, and drowning, that suggest ceremonial rather than punitive execution. The Lindo man, discovered in an English peat bog, had consumed a ritual meal containing mistletoe before his death, indicating preparation for sacrifice, according to druidical practices. These sacrifices likely occurred during major religious festivals or in response to community crises requiring divine intervention. Celtic warfare combined individual heroism with tactical sophistication that proved effective against both tribal enemies and Roman legions. Celtic warriors fought with long swords, spears and shields while wearing minimal armour that emphasised mobility over protection. Their battle tactics relied on initial charges designed to break enemy formations through shock and psychological intimidation. Warriors would advance while shouting war cries, clashing weapons against shields, and displaying individual prowess through combat challenges issued to enemy champions. The psychological aspects of Celtic warfare proved as important as physical combat skills. Warriors decorated their shields and weapons with designs intended to invoke divine protection and intimidate enemies. Some Celtic fighters painted their bodies with blue woad dye and fought naked to demonstrate fearlessness and spiritual power. War trumpets called carnixes, shaped like elongated animal heads, produced haunting sounds that carried for miles and struck terror into opposing forces. These instruments, standing over 6 feet tall when fully extended, created acoustic effects that Roman soldiers found deeply unsettling. Celtic military organisation operated through warrior bands led by experienced champions who had proven themselves in combat. These leaders attracted followers through displays of courage, generosity, and success in battle. Young warriors competed for places in prestigious war bands, seeking opportunities to gain honour and material rewards through participation in raids and battles. The most successful warriors accumulated enough wealth and reputation to establish their own bands, creating networks of military alliance that could mobilise thousands of fighters when major conflicts arose. The resistance to Roman expansion produced Celtic leaders whose military and political skills challenged Roman assumptions about barbarian capabilities. Vercingetorix, the Arverni chieftain who united Gallic tribes against Julius Caesar in 52 BC, demonstrated strategic thinking that nearly succeeded in expelling Roman forces from Gaul. His decision to abandon fixed positions and conduct mobile warfare using scorched earth tactics forced Caesar to adapt Roman military doctrine to counter unfamiliar enemy strategies. Vercingetorix understood that Celtic forces could not match Roman legions in conventional battle, so he developed alternative approaches that exploited Celtic advantages in mobility and local knowledge. He ordered the destruction of settlements and supplies that might benefit Roman forces, forcing Caesar's army to operate in hostile territory without reliable logistics. Celtic cavalry, superior to Roman horsemen in individual skill and knowledge of terrain, harassed Roman columns and prevented effective reconnaissance. These tactics prolonged the conflict and inflicted significant casualties on Roman forces accustomed to quicker victories against less organised opponents. The siege of Alesia marked the climax of Gallic resistance and demonstrated both Celtic military capabilities and their ultimate limitations against Roman engineering and discipline. Vercingetorix chose to defend the hilltop oppidum of Alesia, believing its natural defences and stored supplies would allow a prolonged defence while relief forces gathered. Caesar responded by constructing double lines of fortifications, one facing the town, another facing outward, that created a trap for both the defenders and any relieving army. The engineering achievement of Caesar's siege works at Alesia rivaled any Roman construction project. The inner wall, stretching over 10 miles, incorporated timber palisades, earthen ramparts, concealed obstacles, and water-filled ditches designed to prevent sorties from the town. The outer wall, equally extensive, featured similar defences oriented to repel attacks from relieving forces. Between these walls, Roman legions maintained positions that allowed them to fight on two fronts simultaneously, while controlling access to food and water. The arrival of a massive Gallic relief army created the dramatic climax of the siege. Archaeological evidence suggests this force numbered in the tens of thousands, representing tribes from across Gaul united in their final attempt to preserve independence. The battle that followed involved coordinated attacks from inside and outside the Roman fortifications, with Celtic forces attempting to break through at multiple points simultaneously. Roman discipline and engineering ultimately prevailed, but the scale and organisation of Gallic resistance impressed even Roman observers. In Britain, Boudicca's rebellion in 60 AD demonstrated similar Celtic capabilities for large-scale military organisation and strategic planning. The Iceni queen mobilised not only her own tribe, but also the Trinovantes and other southeastern British peoples in a coordinated uprising that destroyed 3 major Roman settlements. The rebels sacked Camulodunum, Londinium, and Verulamium, killing an estimated 70,000 Roman colonists and British collaborators, according to Tacitus's account. Boudicca's forces employed terror tactics designed to discourage Roman settlement and British collaboration with the occupying power. Archaeological evidence from London reveals a distinctive red burn layer containing melted bronze and glass that marks the destruction of the early Roman city. Human remains found in the Walbrook stream show evidence of ritual mutilation, suggesting Celtic religious practices accompanied the military campaign. These discoveries confirm classical accounts of systematic destruction that went beyond simple military objectives to encompass religious and psychological warfare. The initial success of Boudicca's rebellion reflected sophisticated intelligence gathering and coordination among British tribes. The uprising began while the Roman governor Suetonius Paulinus was campaigning in Anglesey against druidical strongholds, leaving southeastern Britain with reduced military protection. This timing suggests careful planning and communication networks that extended across tribal boundaries. The rebels also demonstrated knowledge of Roman military capabilities and limitations, avoiding pitched battles with legionary forces while targeting vulnerable civilian settlements. Celtic religious practices provided ideological foundation for resistance against Roman expansion. Druids taught that Roman conquest threatened not only political independence, but also spiritual integrity, since Roman religious practices conflicted with Celtic beliefs about the proper relationship between humans and the natural world. The Roman destruction of sacred groves and prohibition of human sacrifice represented attacks on fundamental Celtic religious principles that required armed response to preserve divine favour. The role of Druids as resistance leaders reflected their position as guardians of Celtic cultural identity. These priests possessed knowledge of tribal genealogies, territorial boundaries, and traditional laws that predated Roman occupation. Their opposition to Roman rule carried religious authority that transcended political considerations, making them natural leaders for independence movements. Roman recognition of druidical influence led to systematic persecution of the priesthood, including the assault on Anglesey that provided the opportunity for Boudicca's rebellion. Celtic fortification techniques evolved in response to Roman siege warfare, incorporating lessons learned from earlier conflicts. The multi-valet hill forts of southern Britain featured multiple defensive lines that forced attackers to overcome successive obstacles while exposing themselves to missile fire from defenders. These fortifications often included elaborate entrance systems with overlapping gates, guard chambers, and killing grounds where attackers could be trapped and destroyed. The complexity of such defensive arrangements indicates military engineering knowledge comparable to contemporary Roman fortification science. The dense forests of northern Europe concealed societies that would fundamentally reshape the classical world through their relentless pressure against Roman frontiers. Germanic peoples emerged from archaeological obscurity during the 2nd century BC, when the Cimbrian Teutones launched their devastating migration southward, bringing them into direct collision with Roman power for the first time. These tribal confederations, driven by population pressure and climate deterioration in their Jutland homeland, swept through Gaul with an estimated 300,000 warriors and their families, overwhelming Celtic settlements and threatening Roman territorial integrity in ways that previous barbarian incursions had never achieved. The Cimbri migration began around 113 BC, when harsh winters and rising sea levels rendered their traditional territories uninhabitable. Archaeological evidence from Danish bog sites reveals dramatic environmental changes during this period, with pollen analysis indicating crop failures and settlement abandonment across wide areas of northern Europe. The Cimbri response demonstrated organisational capabilities that Roman observers found deeply troubling. Rather than fragmenting under pressure, these tribes maintained cohesion across thousands of miles of movement while incorporating additional Germanic and Celtic groups into their confederation. Roman encounters with the Cimbri revealed military tactics unlike anything Mediterranean armies had previously faced. Germanic warriors fought in dense formations called the cuneus, or wedge, which concentrated maximum force at specific points in enemy lines while maintaining flexibility for rapid manoeuvres. These formations relied on the psychological impact of massed war cries, weapon clashing, and the sight of tall, blonde warriors advancing with apparent fearlessness toward death. Roman legions, trained for disciplined combat against similar infantry formations, struggled against enemies who combined individual ferocity with collective tactical coherence. The disaster at Arausio in 105 BC demonstrated Germanic military effectiveness against professional Roman forces. 2 consular armies, totaling approximately 120,000 men, including allies and auxiliaries, suffered complete destruction when Cimbri and Teutonus forces exploited Roman command disputes to achieve tactical surprise. Germanic warriors overran Roman camps, slaughtered fleeing soldiers in nearby rivers, and captured military standards that became trophies in their religious ceremonies. The scale of this defeat exceeded even Cannae in terms of manpower losses and strategic implications for Roman security. Gaius Marius's subsequent campaigns against the Germanic invaders revealed both Roman adaptability and Germanic limitations when facing reformed military organisation. Marius restructured legionary training to emphasise individual combat skills while maintaining unit cohesion under extreme pressure. His soldiers learned to fight Germanic warriors in single combat while supporting nearby comrades, countering the Germanic emphasis on individual prowess with disciplined mutual assistance. The victories at Aquis Sextiae and Vercelli in 102, 101 BC demonstrated that Germanic tactical advantages could be neutralised through superior Roman logistics, engineering and sustained combat experience. The Suebi represented a different model of Germanic organisation that proved even more challenging for Roman frontier defence. Unlike the migrating Cimbri and Teutones, the Suebi maintained permanent territories east of the Rhine while conducting regular military expeditions that kept neighbouring peoples in constant fear. Tacitus described them as the most warlike of all Germanic tribes, practising annual population exchanges that prevented territorial attachment while maintaining military readiness. Young Suebi warriors spent years in frontier regions, raiding enemies and perfecting combat skills before returning to establish households and raise the next generation of fighters. Suebi military culture centred on the principle that continuous warfare was essential for tribal survival and individual honour. They deliberately avoided agricultural surplus that might encourage peaceful settlement, instead relying on cattle herding and raiding to meet material needs. This lifestyle produced warriors whose entire identity revolved around combat effectiveness and personal courage in battle. Suebi chiefs gained authority through successful leadership in war, rather than inherited status, creating competitive hierarchies that encouraged aggressive expansion against weaker neighbours. The social organisation of Germanic tribes reflected their emphasis on warrior culture through institutions that bound fighting men to their leaders through personal loyalty rather than abstract political obligation. The comitatus system described by Tacitus represented the fundamental building block of Germanic society, creating relationships between chiefs and warriors that transcended kinship ties while establishing mutual obligations that governed both military and civilian life. Young men of good family sought admission to the war bands of renowned leaders, competing for recognition through displays of courage, skill, and absolute devotion to their chosen chief. Comitatus relationships involved elaborate gift exchanges that demonstrated the chief's generosity, while binding warriors to his service through reciprocal obligations. Successful war leaders distributed weapons, horses, gold arm rings, and other valuables to their followers after victorious campaigns, creating cycles of obligation that required continued military success to maintain. Warriors who received such gifts became honour-bound to defend their chief's life with their own, fighting to the death rather than surviving their leader's fall in battle. This system produced military units of exceptional cohesion and fighting spirit that Roman observers found both admirable and dangerous. Germanic warfare emphasised individual heroism within collective tactical frameworks that maximise both personal glory and military effectiveness. Warriors advanced into battle wearing their finest weapons and ornaments, seeking opportunities to challenge enemy champions, to single combat, while maintaining formation discipline that supported overall tactical objectives. The most prestigious warriors carried elaborately decorated shields, swords with pattern-welded blades, and spear points inscribed with runic symbols invoking divine protection. Archaeological discoveries from weapon deposits in Danish bogs reveal the extraordinary craftsmanship of Germanic military equipment, with some swords showing evidence of ritual destruction that suggests religious significance beyond mere functional value. The religious dimensions of Germanic warfare reflected beliefs that connected earthly combat with cosmic struggles between order and chaos. Warriors who died gloriously in battle earned admission to Valhalla, where they would feast with the gods while preparing for Ragnarok, the final battle that would determine the fate of the universe. This belief system encouraged extraordinary battlefield courage, while providing religious justification for aggressive expansion against neighbouring peoples. Germanic priests accompanied warbands into battle, conducting sacrificial rituals before combat and interpreting omens that guided tactical decisions. Woden, known to later Scandinavian sources as Odin, served as the primary deity of Germanic warrior culture. Archaeological evidence from ritual sites across northern Europe reveals systematic weapon sacrifices dedicated to this god of war, death, and wisdom. The great weapon deposits at Illerup and Thorsberg contain thousands of spears, swords, and shields deliberately damaged before deposition, suggesting victory celebrations where captured enemy equipment was offered to Woden in gratitude for battlefield success. These sites also contain Roman military equipment, indicating Germanic victories against legionary forces that provided prestigious offerings for their war god. Thor represented another crucial aspect of Germanic religious life, serving as protector of human communities against the chaotic forces represented by giants and monsters. Archaeological discoveries of hammer-shaped amulets throughout Germanic territories demonstrate widespread devotion to this deity, whose weapon Mjolnir symbolised both destructive power and protective blessing. Thor's role as defender of cosmic order provided religious sanction for Germanic resistance against Roman expansion, which many tribes interpreted as an assault on traditional religious practices and social organisation. The concept of weird or fate played a central role in Germanic worldview, influencing both individual behaviour and collective decision-making in ways that shaped their interactions with Roman civilization. Germanic peoples believed that individual destinies were predetermined by supernatural forces, but that personal courage and honour in fulfilling one's fate determined posthumous reputation and divine favour. This belief system encouraged acceptance of death in battle while emphasising the importance of achieving glory through heroic action. Warriors who fled from combat brought shame not only on themselves, but on their entire lineage, while those who died courageously earned eternal honour for their families. Germanic migration patterns during the 3rd through 5th centuries AD reflected both external pressures and internal social dynamics that drove tribal movements across vast distances. The expansion of Hunnic power from the Pontic steppes created a domino effect that displaced Gothic confederations from their territories north of the Black Sea, forcing these peoples westward into conflict with Roman frontier defences. Simultaneously, climate deterioration in northern Europe reduced agricultural productivity and increased competition for scarce resources, encouraging southern migration toward more favourable territories within the Roman Empire. Archaeological evidence reveals the complexity of these population movements, which involved not simple mass migrations but gradual infiltration, military conquest, and cultural assimilation that transformed both Germanic and Roman societies. Germanic settlements within Roman territories often maintained traditional burial practices, ceramic styles, and metalworking techniques while adopting Roman architectural features and agricultural methods. This cultural blending created hybrid societies that preserved Germanic identity while adapting to Mediterranean economic and political systems. The pressure of Hunnic expansion fundamentally altered the balance of power along Roman frontiers by forcing Germanic tribes to choose between submission to steppe nomads or migration into Roman territory. The Hunnic military system, based on mounted archery and rapid manoeuvre, proved devastatingly effective against Germanic infantry formations that relied on close combat with spears and swords. Tribes that attempted to resist Hunnic expansion suffered catastrophic defeats that destroyed their military capacity and forced surviving populations to seek refuge across Roman borders. Climate change during the 4th and 5th centuries AD exacerbated these political pressures by reducing agricultural productivity across northern Europe. Paleoclimatic data from ice cores and tree rings indicates cooling temperatures and increased precipitation that shortened growing seasons and reduced crop yields throughout Germanic territories. Archaeological evidence from abandoned settlements in Denmark and northern Germany confirms widespread population decline during this period, as communities struggled to maintain subsistence in deteriorating environmental conditions. Germanic religious practices adapted to these challenging circumstances through increased emphasis on divination and sacrifice designed to influence supernatural forces controlling weather and agricultural fertility. Bog body discoveries from this period show evidence of elaborate ritual killings conducted according to specific religious protocols, suggesting community responses to crisis through human sacrifice intended to restore divine favour. The Tolland man and other bog bodies display evidence of ritual preparation, including special meals and careful positioning that indicates religious rather than criminal execution. The transformation of Germanic society under these pressures produced new forms of political organisation that combined traditional warrior leadership with territorial administration capable of governing settled populations. Kings emerged from successful war leaders who could provide both military protection and effective governance for communities facing external threats and internal challenges. These rulers maintained traditional comitatus relationships with warrior followers, while developing administrative systems that managed agricultural production, craft specialization, and trade relationships necessary for territorial states. Germanic legal traditions evolved to address the complexities of settled life while preserving customary practices that maintained social cohesion and cultural identity. The development of written law codes during the 5th and 6th centuries AD reflected both Roman influence and Germanic legal principles that emphasized compensation rather than punishment for most crimes. These codes preserved traditional concepts of honour, kinship obligation, and personal responsibility while adapting to circumstances that required more complex dispute resolution mechanisms than tribal assemblies could provide. The military evolution of Germanic peoples during their encounters with Roman civilization produced tactical innovations that combined traditional fighting methods with lessons learned from observing legionary organisation and equipment. Germanic warriors adopted Roman-style helmets, improved armour construction, and siege techniques while maintaining their emphasis on individual prowess and personal loyalty to war leaders. This military synthesis created armies capable of both guerrilla warfare in forest environments and conventional battles against Roman field forces. The emergence of Hunnic power from the vast steppes of Central Asia marked a pivotal transformation in the barbarian world, introducing a form of warfare and social organisation that would fundamentally alter the balance of power across Eurasia. Unlike the Germanic tribes with their forest strongholds, or the Celtic peoples with their hill forts, the Huns represented pure nomadic mobility, a society built entirely around the horse and the composite bow that could strike with devastating speed across distances that rendered traditional defensive strategies obsolete. Archaeological evidence from burial sites across the Mongolian steppes reveals the deep antiquity of nomadic cultures that would eventually coalesce into the Hunnic Confederation. Excavations at sites like Noinula have uncovered elaborate tombs dating to the 2nd century BC containing Chinese silks, Roman glassware, and locally produced horse gear of extraordinary sophistication. These discoveries demonstrate the existence of complex trade networks spanning the entire Eurasian continent, with nomadic peoples serving as crucial intermediaries who connected Mediterranean civilizations with the Far East through their mastery of overland transportation. The origins of the specific tribal groups that would become known to Europeans as Huns remain obscured by the limitations of written sources and the archaeological challenges of tracking mobile populations across vast territories. Chinese chronicles from the Han dynasty describe conflicts with nomadic confederations called the Xiongnu, whose military tactics and social organisation bear striking resemblances to later Hunnic practices observed by Roman and Gothic sources. The Xiongnu employed massed cavalry archery, maintained hierarchical clan structures based on military prowess, and conducted systematic campaigns designed to extract tribute from settled agricultural populations. Chinese military treatises provide detailed accounts of Xiongnu warfare that illuminate the tactical innovations later employed by Hunnic forces against Germanic tribes and Roman armies. Xiongnu warriors fought exclusively on horseback, using powerful composite bows constructed from layers of wood, sinew and horn that could penetrate armour at ranges exceeding 300 yards. These weapons required years of training to master effectively, but their range and penetrating power made them devastatingly effective against infantry formations that relied on close combat with spears and swords. The composite bow represented a technological achievement that gave nomadic peoples decisive military advantages over their settled neighbours. The construction process required specialised knowledge of animal anatomy, wood properties, and adhesive chemistry that was passed down through generations of skilled craftsmen. The finished weapons could maintain their effectiveness in extreme weather conditions that rendered other bow types useless, allowing nomadic armies to campaign throughout winter months when their enemies expected seasonal truces. Hunnic society organised itself around the fundamental unit of the Ordu, a military household that combined extended family relationships with warrior band loyalty in ways that created remarkably cohesive fighting forces. Each Ordu typically included several hundred warriors along with their families, servants and herds, forming self-sufficient communities that could operate independently while contributing to larger military campaigns when circumstances required. The leader of each Ordu held authority based on proven military success and the ability to provide for his followers through successful raids and diplomatic negotiations. The westward migration of Hunnic peoples during the 4th century AD created a cascade of displacement that affected every barbarian society from the Volga River to the Atlantic Ocean. Gothic chroniclers describe the sudden appearance of Hunnic raiders north of the Black Sea around 370 AD, when mounted archers struck Gothic settlements with unprecedented speed and ferocity. The Goths, accustomed to warfare against Germanic infantry and Roman legions, possessed no effective defence against enemies who could loose volleys of arrows from horseback, while remaining beyond the reach of Gothic spears and swords. The collapse of Gothic power under Hunnic pressure demonstrated the revolutionary nature of steppe warfare when applied against European military systems. The Gothic king Ermanaric, ruler of a vast confederation stretching from the Baltic to the Black Sea, found his traditional tactics useless against enemies who refused to engage in the close combat that Gothic warriors had mastered. Hunnic forces would approach Gothic formations, unleash devastating arrow storms, then retreat before Gothic infantry could close to effective fighting range. This process could be repeated indefinitely, wearing down Gothic resistance through casualties and exhaustion, while preserving Hunnic's strength for decisive strikes. Archaeological evidence from Gothic cemeteries dating to this period reveals the traumatic impact of Hunnic's expansion on established barbarian societies. Burial sites show evidence of hasty interment, incomplete grave goods, and defensive positioning that suggests communities under constant threat. Weapon deposits indicate changes in military equipment, with increased emphasis on armour and shields designed to counter arrow attacks rather than the lighter gear suitable for combat against other infantry forces. The Hunnic military system achieved its effectiveness through the integration of superior mobility, advanced weaponry, and tactical flexibility that allowed rapid adaptation to different combat situations. Hunnic armies could cover enormous distances in minimal time, appearing without warning to strike targets hundreds of miles from their previous known positions. Roman frontier commanders found their intelligence networks useless against enemies whose movements could not be predicted or tracked through conventional reconnaissance methods. The organisation of Hunnic military campaigns reflected sophisticated logistical planning that enabled large forces to operate across vast territories without fixed supply lines. Hunnic warriors carried minimal personal equipment, relying on their horses for transportation, their bows for hunting, and their herds for sustenance. Each warrior typically maintained multiple mounts, allowing continuous movement without rest periods that limited other cavalry forces. The Hunnic practice of drinking mare's milk and horseblood provided nutrition that could sustain warriors for extended periods, without requiring supply trains or foraging that might reveal their positions to enemies. Hunnic siege warfare initially relied on intimidation and blockade, rather than the elaborate engineering techniques employed by Roman armies. Early Hunnic campaigns against fortified positions involved surrounding strongholds with mounted forces that prevented supply deliveries, while conducting psychological warfare designed to break defender morale. Hunnic warriors would display captured enemy heads, torture prisoners within sight of fortress walls, and conduct mock attacks that demonstrated their numerical superiority while conserving their strength for more vulnerable targets. The evolution of Hunnic siege capabilities occurred through contact with Germanic peoples and Roman deserters who provided technical knowledge of fortress construction and assault techniques. Archaeological evidence from sites like Aquincum reveals Hunnic adoption of battering rams, siege towers, and undermining techniques that enabled attacks on previously impregnable fortifications. This technological transfer represented a crucial development that allowed Hunnic forces to eliminate strongholds that might otherwise serve as bases for enemy resistance or refuges for civilian populations. The rise of Attila to supreme leadership of the Hunnic Confederation around 440 AD marked the transformation of nomadic raiding bands into a centralized military empire capable of challenging both Roman successor states simultaneously. Attila's consolidation of power involved eliminating rival claimants, including his own brother Bleda, through methods that demonstrated both political ruthlessness and military effectiveness. The unification of previously independent Hunnic clans under single leadership created an unprecedented concentration of nomadic military power that could field armies numbering in the tens of thousands. Attila's diplomatic strategies revealed sophisticated understanding of Roman internal politics and the opportunities created by the division between Eastern and Western imperial administrations. He exploited rivalries between Constantinople and Ravenna by negotiating separate agreements with each court while maintaining the threat of military action against both. Hunnic embassies to Roman capitals combined demands for tribute with intelligence gathering that provided detailed information about Roman military capabilities, political divisions, and economic resources. The Hunnic tribute system, established by Attila's negotiations with Roman authorities, created a form of protection racket that generated enormous wealth, while avoiding the costs and risks of direct territorial conquest. Annual payments from both Roman courts provided Hunnic leaders with gold, silk, and luxury goods that could be distributed to maintain warrior loyalty and clan allegiance. These arrangements also included provisions for Hunnic access to Roman markets, allowing nomadic peoples to acquire manufactured goods and agricultural products that supplemented their pastoral economy. Attila's court, established at a permanent settlement somewhere in the Carpathian Basin, represented an unprecedented attempt to create a nomadic capital that could serve as an administrative centre for a vast confederation of tribal peoples. Roman envoys who visited this settlement described elaborate wooden halls decorated with rich textiles and precious metals, surrounded by the tents and wagons of various tribal groups that had gathered to participate in Hunnic assemblies. The architectural evidence suggests a hybrid culture that combined nomadic mobility with elements of settled administration necessary for governing territorial empire. The internal organisation of Attila's empire relied on personal relationships between the supreme leader and subordinate chiefs, who maintained authority over their own tribal groups while acknowledging Hunnic overlordship. This system preserved traditional nomadic social structures while creating hierarchical command relationships that enabled coordinated military campaigns involving multiple ethnic groups. Germanic, Sarmatian, and Alanic warriors served alongside Hunnic cavalry in armies that could deploy diverse tactical capabilities according to specific combat requirements. The treatment of subject peoples within the Hunnic Empire varied according to their military value and potential for resistance. Germanic tribes that submitted voluntarily often retained their traditional leadership and internal organisation while providing warriors for Hunnic campaigns and tribute for the imperial treasury. Peoples who resisted Hunnic expansion faced systematic destruction designed to eliminate future threats, while providing examples that encouraged submission from other potential opponents. Archaeological evidence from settlements destroyed during Hunnic expansion reveals the thoroughness of nomadic military campaigns when resistance was encountered. Sites across the Danube frontier show evidence of complete destruction, with buildings burned, defensive walls dismantled, and population centres abandoned permanently. The scale of destruction suggests deliberate policy rather than random violence, indicating Hunnic understanding of the psychological impact of total warfare on potential enemies. The military campaigns conducted under Attila's leadership demonstrated the evolution of Hunnic warfare from raiding expeditions into systematic conquest designed to achieve specific political objectives. The invasion of Gaul in 451 AD involved careful coordination between multiple armies, extensive intelligence gathering about Roman defensive preparations, and diplomatic negotiations with potential allies among Germanic tribes already settled within Roman territories. This campaign represented the culmination of nomadic military development, combining traditional steppe tactics with strategic planning comparable to contemporary Roman military doctrine. The Battle of the Catalonian Plains revealed both the strengths and limitations of Hunnic military organisation when facing coordinated opposition from multiple enemy forces. Attila's army included not only Hunnic cavalry, but also Germanic infantry, Sarmatian lancers, and various other tribal contingents whose tactical capabilities complemented nomadic archery. The Roman coalition assembled by Aetius similarly combined legionary infantry with Germanic federates and Visigothic cavalry, creating a military force that could match Hunnic tactical diversity. The aftermath of this battle demonstrated the fragility of nomadic political structures that depended entirely on the personal authority of individual leaders. Although the engagement ended without decisive victory for either side, the failure to achieve the rapid success that Hunnic warfare required began the process of confederation disintegration that would accelerate following Attila's death. The withdrawal from Gaul represented not military defeat, but the recognition that traditional nomadic tactics had reached their strategic limitations against properly organised opposition. Attila's subsequent invasion of Italy in 452 AD revealed the continuing effectiveness of Hunnic military pressure against isolated targets, while demonstrating the logistical challenges of sustained campaigns in unfamiliar terrain. The rapid capture of Aquileia and other northern Italian cities showed that Hunnic siege techniques had evolved sufficiently to overcome urban fortifications, but the decision to withdraw without attacking Rome reflected practical limitations rather than diplomatic considerations. The death of Attila in 453 AD precipitated the immediate collapse of Hunnic imperial unity as rival claimants competed for succession, while subject peoples exploited the opportunity to regain independence. The nomadic political system that had enabled rapid expansion under effective leadership proved incapable of maintaining cohesion during succession crises. Germanic tribes that had served as Hunnic federates quickly reasserted their autonomy, while rival Hunnic clans began fighting among themselves for control of the Confederation's accumulated wealth and prestige. The Battle of Nidau in 454 AD marked the definitive end of Hunnic dominance over the barbarian world, when a coalition of Germanic peoples defeated the divided Hunnic forces and killed Attila's eldest son, Ellac. This victory enabled the Gepids, Ostrogoths, and other Germanic tribes to establish independent kingdoms in territories previously controlled by the Hunnic Empire. The rapid dissolution of nomadic power demonstrated the fundamental instability of political systems based entirely on personal authority and military success. The legacy of Hunnic expansion extended far beyond the brief period of their imperial dominance, fundamentally altering the demographic and political landscape of Europe through the population movements and cultural exchanges that their conquests had initiated. Germanic peoples displaced by Hunnic pressure had established new kingdoms throughout former Roman territories, while the collapse of centralized nomadic power created opportunities for Slavic expansion into regions previously dominated by Germanic and nomadic peoples. The Hunnic period thus represented a crucial transitional phase that connected the classical barbarian migrations with the medieval European political order that would emerge from the ruins of Roman imperial authority. The collapse of Hunnic imperial authority created a power vacuum that ambitious Germanic leaders rushed to fill, none more successfully than Alaric I of the Visigoths, whose calculated manipulation of Roman internal divisions would culminate in the unthinkable, the sack of the Eternal City itself. By 395 AD, Alaric had emerged as king of the Visigothic Confederation, following years of service as a Roman foederatus, a position that provided him with intimate knowledge of imperial military capabilities and political weaknesses. His transformation from Roman ally to existential threat reflected the fundamental instability of barbarian-Roman relationships during the empire's final century. Alaric's early career demonstrated the complex loyalties that characterized late imperial politics, where barbarian leaders navigated between service to Rome and advancement of their own people's interests. He had commanded Gothic auxiliaries during Theodosius Thus' campaigns against the usurper Eugenius, fighting alongside Roman legions at the Battle of the Frigidus in 394 AD. The Gothic contribution to this victory proved decisive, with Visigothic warriors absorbing enormous casualties while breaking the enemy line through their characteristic wedge formations. Despite this sacrifice, Alaric received no recognition from the new Emperor Honorius, a slight that transformed a valuable ally into a dangerous enemy. The political chaos following Theodosius's death in 395 AD provided Alaric with opportunities to exploit Roman weakness while building Visigothic power. The division of imperial authority between Honorius in the west and Arcadius in the east created competing centres of power that barbarian leaders could manipulate through shifting alliances and territorial demands. Alaric initially aligned himself with Constantinople, accepting the title of Magister Militum per Illyricum from Arcadius, while using this position to consolidate control over Gothic settlements in the Balkans. The Visigothic military organisation under Alaric combined traditional Germanic warrior bands with tactical innovations learned through service in Roman armies. Gothic infantry retained their preference for close combat with spears and longswords, but Alaric supplemented these forces with cavalry units trained in Roman fighting methods and siege equipment operated by craftsmen familiar with imperial engineering techniques. This military synthesis created armies capable of both guerrilla warfare in mountainous terrain and conventional battles against Roman field forces. Alaric's invasion of Italy in 401 AD marked the beginning of a decade-long campaign that would expose the hollow nature of Western imperial defences. His forces crossed the Julian Alps during winter months when Roman commanders expected seasonal truces, achieving strategic surprise that allowed rapid penetration into the Po Valley. The speed of this advance caught Roman authorities unprepared, forcing the evacuation of the imperial court from Milan to the more defensible position of Ravenna, behind extensive marshlands and naval protection. The Siege of Milan demonstrated Visigothic adaptation of Roman siege techniques to overcome urban fortifications that had previously provided security against barbarian raids. Alaric's forces constructed earthwork ramps, deployed battering rams, and conducted systematic attacks on gate structures using methods learned during their service as Roman auxiliaries. The city's eventual relief by Stilicho's army prevented its capture, but the psychological impact of barbarian forces threatening major Italian cities shattered Roman confidence in traditional frontier defences. Stilicho's counteroffensive revealed both the continued effectiveness of professional Roman military organisation and the growing dependence on barbarian federates for imperial defence. His victory at Pollentia in 402 AD relied heavily on Alanic cavalry and Hun mounted archers fighting alongside depleted legionary units. The battle itself demonstrated the evolution of late imperial warfare, with Roman forces adopting barbarian tactical elements while maintaining superior discipline and coordination under experienced commanders. The aftermath of Pollentia illustrated the complex relationship between military victory and political resolution in barbarian Roman conflicts. Despite his tactical defeat, Alaric retained most of his forces and continued to threaten Italian security from bases in the Eastern Alps. Stilicho's inability to destroy the Visigothic army completely reflected logistical constraints and political considerations that prevented sustained campaigns against enemies who could retreat into inaccessible mountain terrain. Alaric's subsequent negotiations with Honorius's court revealed sophisticated understanding of Roman administrative procedures and legal frameworks. His demands included not only territorial grants for Gothic settlement, but also official recognition of his authority over these lands and annual subsidies to maintain Gothic military service. These negotiations represented attempts to formalise barbarian settlement within imperial territories through legal mechanisms that preserved Roman sovereignty while acknowledging barbarian autonomy. The murder of Stilicho in 408 AD eliminated the last effective defender of the Western Empire and provided Alaric with the opportunity he had long sought. Stilicho's execution, ordered by Honorius in response to senatorial accusations of treason, removed the only Roman commander capable of coordinating effective resistance against Gothic pressure. The subsequent massacre of barbarian families serving in Roman armies drove thousands of Germanic warriors into Alaric's forces, swelling his military strength at the moment when Roman defences reached their lowest point. Alaric march on Rome in 408 AD represented the culmination of Gothic military evolution from tribal raiding bands into a disciplined army capable of conducting complex strategic operations. His forces moved through central Italy with remarkable speed, avoiding fortified positions while targeting supply lines and communication networks that sustained Roman administrative control. The systematic nature of this campaign demonstrated military planning that rivaled contemporary Roman strategic doctrine. The First Siege of Rome revealed the city's vulnerability to enemies who understood the economic foundations of urban survival. Alaric positioned his forces to control the Tiber River and the major roads connecting Rome with its agricultural hinterland, creating a blockade that gradually starved the population while preserving Gothic strength for more decisive actions. The siege lasted several months, during which food prices increased exponentially and civilian morale collapsed under the pressure of impending starvation. The Gothic camp outside Rome's walls presented a spectacle that shattered Roman assumptions about barbarian capabilities and organisation. Archaeological evidence from similar Germanic settlements reveals the sophisticated logistics required to maintain large military forces in fixed positions for extended periods. Gothic warriors constructed earthwork fortifications, organised supply systems, and maintained discipline that impressed even hostile Roman observers. The presence of Gothic families, craftsmen, and merchants within these camps demonstrated the extent to which the Visigoths had evolved from nomadic raiders into a mobile nation seeking permanent territorial settlement. Roman negotiations with Alaric during this first siege revealed the desperation of imperial authorities faced with enemies they could neither defeat militarily nor satisfy politically. The Senate authorised payments of £5,000 of gold, £30,000 of silver, and vast quantities of luxury goods including silk garments and pepper to secure Gothic withdrawal. These enormous sums represented a significant portion of the empire's remaining liquid wealth, demonstrating the extent to which barbarian pressure had disrupted imperial finances. The temporary resolution achieved through these payments proved unsustainable because it addressed symptoms rather than fundamental causes of barbarian Roman conflict. Alaric withdrew from Rome but remained in Italy with his forces intact, continuing to demand territorial grants and official recognition that Honorius's government could not provide without acknowledging the collapse of imperial authority. The Gothic king's position as an armed negotiator within Roman territory created an unprecedented situation that existing diplomatic frameworks could not resolve. Alaric's second siege of Rome in 409 AD demonstrated increased Gothic capabilities in urban warfare and political manipulation. His forces had acquired additional siege equipment and engineering expertise during their extended presence in Italy, enabling more effective attacks on the city's fortifications. Simultaneously, Alaric exploited divisions within the Roman Senate by supporting the elevation of Priscus Attalus as a rival emperor, creating a political alternative to Honorius that legitimised Gothic demands while fragmenting Roman resistance. The establishment of Attalus as emperor revealed Alaric's sophisticated understanding of Roman constitutional procedures and the importance of legal legitimacy in imperial politics. Rather than simply demanding tribute through military threats, the Gothic king created a puppet government that could issue official decrees authorising barbarian settlement and military appointments. This strategy demonstrated political acumen that surpassed many contemporary Roman leaders in its appreciation of legal forms and administrative requirements. The failure of the Attalus experiment illustrated the limitations of barbarian political innovation when faced with entrenched Roman institutional resistance. Despite holding Rome and controlling the imperial treasury, the puppet emperor could not secure recognition from provincial governors or military commanders who remained loyal to Honorius. The Gothic-sponsored government lacked the administrative apparatus necessary to govern effectively beyond the immediate vicinity of Rome itself. Alaric's decision to depose Attalus and resume direct negotiations with Honorius reflected pragmatic recognition that political manipulation could not substitute for military conquest when dealing with Roman institutional resistance. The Gothic king's willingness to abandon his puppet emperor demonstrated flexibility that characterised successful barbarian leadership during this period. Leaders who could adapt their strategies to changing circumstances proved more effective than those who remained committed to single approaches regardless of results. The third siege of Rome in 410 AD culminated in the event that contemporaries considered impossible: the capture and sack of the Eternal City by barbarian forces. Alaric's entry into Rome occurred through treachery rather than assault, with Gothic forces gaining access through the Salarian Gate opened by sympathetic elements within the city. This method of capture reflected the extent to which Roman society had fragmented under barbarian pressure, creating internal divisions that enemies could exploit. The sack itself lasted 3 days and followed patterns established during previous Gothic victories over Roman settlements. Visigothic warriors systematically looted public buildings, private residences and religious structures while generally respecting the sanctuary rights of churches. Archaeological evidence from contemporary destruction layers in other cities suggests that Gothic forces focused primarily on portable wealth, rather than wanton destruction, indicating disciplined military behaviour rather than random violence. The psychological impact of Rome's fall reverberated throughout the Mediterranean world, shattering assumptions about Roman invincibility that had persisted for centuries. Christian writers like Jerome expressed shock that the city which had conquered the world could itself be conquered by barbarians, while pagan intellectuals attributed the disaster to abandonment of traditional gods. The event marked a symbolic turning point that demonstrated the irreversible decline of Western imperial power. Alaric's death shortly after the sack of Rome prevented him from capitalising on his unprecedented achievement. His successor, Ataulf, inherited the challenge of transforming military victory into sustainable political arrangements that could provide security for the Visigothic people. The transition of leadership occurred at a crucial moment when Gothic forces controlled enormous wealth, but lacked secure territorial bases for permanent settlement. Ataulf's marriage to Galla Placidia, Honorius' sister captured during the sack of Rome, represented an attempt to legitimize Visigothic claims through dynastic alliance with the imperial family. This union symbolized the extent to which barbarian leaders sought integration with Roman political structures rather than simple destruction of imperial authority. The wedding ceremony, conducted with imperial regalia in a Roman palace, demonstrated Gothic appreciation for the prestige associated with Roman constitutional forms. The establishment of the Visigothic kingdom in southwestern Gaul marked the successful conclusion of Alaric's strategic vision, achieved by his successors through continued military pressure and diplomatic negotiation. The Faedus of 418 AD granted the Visigoths extensive territories around Toulouse in exchange for military service against other barbarian groups threatening Roman interests. This arrangement represented the first formal recognition of an independent barbarian kingdom within former Roman territories. Visigothic settlement in Gaul involved complex arrangements between Gothic nobles and Roman landowners that preserved existing agricultural systems while establishing new political hierarchies. Archaeological evidence reveals continuity in villa construction and agricultural techniques, suggesting that Gothic settlements supplemented rather than replaced existing population. The integration of Roman and Gothic elites through intermarriage and shared administrative responsibilities created hybrid ruling classes that governed through combinations of Germanic custom and Roman law. The Breviary of Alaric, promulgated in 506 AD, represented the culmination of Visigothic legal development and demonstrated sophisticated understanding of jurisprudential principles derived from both Germanic tradition and Roman precedent. This law code addressed the complex legal relationships that emerged from barbarian settlement among Roman populations, establishing procedures for resolving disputes between different ethnic groups while maintaining distinct legal traditions for each community. Visigothic conversion from Arianism to Catholic Christianity under King, recorded in 589 AD, eliminated the primary source of religious conflict between Gothic rulers and their Roman subjects. This conversion facilitated political integration while preserving Gothic ethnic identity through continued use of Germanic names, burial customs, and material culture. Archaeological evidence from Visigothic cemeteries reveals the persistence of traditional grave goods and burial orientation alongside Christian symbols, indicating religious synthesis rather than complete cultural assimilation. The Vandal Confederation under Genseric pursued a different path toward barbarian state formation, emphasizing naval power and Mediterranean commerce rather than territorial integration with Roman populations. Vandal migration from the Danube frontier to North Africa represented one of the most remarkable achievements in barbarian military history, involving the movement of approximately 80,000 people across hostile territory to establish a kingdom in regions they had never previously inhabited. Genseric's conquest of North Africa exploited Roman civil wars and religious divisions that weakened imperial defences at the crucial moment when Vandal forces crossed from Spain. The Vandal king demonstrated strategic insight comparable to the greatest Roman commanders in his recognition that control of Africa's grain exports would provide leverage over both Western and Eastern imperial governments. His rapid capture of Hippo Regius and Carthage established Vandal control over the economic foundations of Roman power in the Western Mediterranean. The Vandal fleet constructed under Genseric's direction represented the most formidable naval force in the Mediterranean during the 5th century AD. Archaeological discoveries of Vandal shipyards and harbour installations reveal sophisticated understanding of naval architecture and maritime logistics that enabled systematic raiding throughout the Mediterranean basin. Vandal vessels combined Germanic construction techniques with Mediterranean design elements, creating ships capable of both riverine operations and open ocean voyages. Genseric's sack of Rome in 455 AD demonstrated the effectiveness of Vandal naval strategy and the vulnerability of Italian coastal cities to seaborne attack. Unlike Alaric's prolonged siege, the Vandal assault achieved surprise through amphibious landing that bypassed Roman frontier defences entirely. The systematic looting that followed revealed Vandal appreciation for portable wealth and artistic treasures that could be transported to Africa for redistribution among the Confederation's supporters. The Vandal kingdom in North Africa developed administrative systems that preserved Roman fiscal structures while establishing Germanic political hierarchies. Vandal nobles received grants of Roman estates worked by existing tenant farmers, creating economic arrangements that maintained agricultural productivity while transferring surplus to new masters. This system proved more stable than simple military occupation because it preserved incentives for continued cultivation while providing Vandal elites with the resources necessary to maintain their warrior retinues. Vandal persecution of Catholic Christians reflected both religious conviction and political calculation designed to eliminate potential sources of resistance to barbarian rule. The Vandal adherence to Arianism created theological justification for suppressing Catholic clergy, who maintained loyalty to imperial authorities and encouraged resistance among Roman populations. Archaeological evidence from destroyed churches and martyrdom accounts reveal the systematic nature of this persecution, which continued throughout the period of Vandal dominance. The eventual reconquest of Vandal Africa by Justinian's forces in 534 AD demonstrated both the achievements and limitations of barbarian state formation during the post-imperial period. Belisarius' rapid victory over Vandal forces revealed the extent to which prolonged settlement in Mediterranean territories had eroded traditional Germanic military capabilities. Vandal warriors who had become accustomed to urban luxury and naval warfare proved ineffective against disciplined Byzantine infantry employing traditional Roman tactical methods. The collapse of Vandal power in North Africa coincided with the emergence of a far more enduring barbarian success story in the forests and river valleys of northern Gaul, where Frankish chieftains had been quietly building the foundations of what would become medieval Europe's dominant political force. Unlike the dramatic migrations and conquests that characterised Visigothic and Vandal expansion, Frankish ascendancy developed through gradual territorial consolidation, strategic alliance building, and the crucial decision to align themselves with Catholic Christianity rather than the Arian heresy that had isolated other Germanic kingdoms from their Roman subjects. The Merovingian dynasty emerged from the complex tribal politics of 5th century Gaul, where multiple Frankish kingdoms competed for dominance, while Roman authority disintegrated around them. Childeric I, ruling from his stronghold at Tournai around 460 AD, exemplified the hybrid warrior administrator that characterised successful barbarian leadership during this transitional period. His tomb, discovered intact in 1653, revealed the extraordinary wealth and cultural sophistication of Frankish royal courts, containing Roman imperial regalia alongside traditional Germanic weapons and horse gear decorated with cloisonne garnets and gold filigree work of exceptional quality. Archaeological evidence from Childric's burial demonstrates the extent to which Frankish elites had absorbed Roman administrative practices while maintaining their Germanic military traditions. The tomb contained an imperial seal ring bearing Childric's name and title as Rex Francorum, indicating formal recognition of his authority by Roman officials who could no longer maintain direct control over northern Gallic territories. Simultaneously, the presence of throwing axes, spears and a long sword revealed the continued importance of personal combat prowess in establishing political legitimacy among Frankish warriors. The transition from Childeric to his son Clovis the First around 481 AD marked the beginning of systematic Frankish expansion that would transform a minor tribal kingdom into the dominant power in post-Roman Gaul. Clovis inherited not only his father's territories around the Somme River, but also his network of alliances with Roman administrators, Catholic bishops, and rival Frankish chieftains who recognised the advantages of cooperation over continued fragmentation. The young king's early campaigns demonstrated military capabilities that combined traditional Germanic ferocity with tactical innovations learned through observation of late Roman military methods. Clovis's victory over Syagrius at Soissons in 486 AD eliminated the last remnant of Roman authority in northern Gaul and established Frankish control over territories extending from the English Channel to the Loire River. Syagrius, styling himself Rex Romanorum, commanded forces that included both Roman regulars and barbarian federates, yet his army proved incapable of matching Frankish tactical flexibility and superior knowledge of local terrain. The battle itself followed patterns established in earlier Germanic victories over Roman forces, with Frankish warriors using their characteristic wedge formations to break enemy lines before exploiting gaps with individual combat skills that Roman training could not match. The aftermath of Soissons revealed Clovis's political sophistication in his treatment of conquered Roman populations and administrative structures. Rather than destroying existing governmental systems, the Frankish king preserved Roman fiscal machinery, legal procedures, and administrative personnel while replacing military commanders with his own trusted followers. This approach maintained economic productivity and social stability while establishing Frankish political control through methods that minimised resistance from Roman elites who retained their properties and local authority under new management. Frankish expansion under Clovis proceeded systematically through a combination of military conquest, diplomatic marriage, and religious conversion that demonstrated remarkable strategic coherence. His marriage to Clotilde, a Catholic Burgundian princess, provided access to networks of Christian bishops and Roman aristocrats who viewed Catholic Franks as preferable to Arian Visigoths or pagan Alemanni. This alliance proved crucial in legitimising Frankish rule among Roman populations, who had maintained their Catholic faith despite barbarian conquest. The conversion of Clovis to Catholic Christianity around 508 AD represented the pivotal moment that distinguished Frankish development from other Germanic kingdoms and established the foundation for their eventual imperial success. Unlike Visigothic, Vandal and Burgundian rulers who had adopted Arianism, Clovis embraced the orthodox Christianity of his Roman subjects, eliminating the primary source of religious conflict that weakened other barbarian states. This decision reflected both personal conviction and calculated political strategy designed to maximise Frankish integration with existing Roman social structures. Gregory of Tours provides the most detailed account of Clovis's conversion, describing the king's baptism at Rheims by Bishop Remigius as a moment of profound religious and political significance. The ceremony itself followed Roman imperial precedents, with Clovis emerging from the baptismal font clothed in white garments, while 3,000 Frankish warriors underwent simultaneous conversion. This mass baptism symbolised the transformation of the entire Frankish confederation from paganism to Christianity, creating religious unity between rulers and subjects that other barbarian kingdoms had failed to achieve. The military implications of Frankish conversion became apparent during Clovis's subsequent campaigns against Arian kingdoms, where Catholic bishops provided intelligence, logistical support, and ideological justification for Frankish conquest. The war against the Visigoths in 507 AD demonstrated the effectiveness of this religious alliance, with Catholic clergy throughout Aquitaine facilitating Frankish advance while encouraging defections from Visigothic forces. The decisive battle at Vuille resulted in complete Frankish victory and the death of Visigothic king Alaric II, establishing Frankish control over territories extending to the Pyrenees. Frankish military organisation under Clovis combined traditional Germanic warrior bands with tactical innovations that reflected their expanding territorial responsibilities and increasingly complex strategic objectives. The core of Frankish armies remained the trusties, elite warriors bound to the king through personal oaths who served as both bodyguards and military commanders. These men received grants of land and tribute rights in exchange for military service, creating feudal relationships that would characterise medieval European political organisation for centuries. The famous Francisca, the throwing axe that gave the Franks their name, represented both practical weapon and cultural symbol that distinguished Frankish warriors from other Germanic peoples. Archaeological discoveries reveal the sophisticated metallurgy required to produce these weapons, with iron heads welded to steel cutting edges that could penetrate armour while remaining balanced for accurate throwing at ranges up to 30 yards. Frankish warriors typically carried multiple Franciscas along with spears, swords, and shields, providing tactical flexibility that proved effective against diverse enemy formations. Frankish siege warfare evolved rapidly during Clovis's campaigns, as the kingdom faced increasingly sophisticated fortifications in Roman cities and Visigothic strongholds. Early Frankish forces relied primarily on blockade and assault tactics that exploited their superior numbers and individual combat skills, but prolonged campaigns required more systematic approaches to fortress reduction. The capture of cities like Verdun and Toulouse demonstrated Frankish adoption of Roman siege techniques, including battering rams, siege towers, and undermining operations conducted by skilled engineers recruited from conquered territories. The administrative consolidation of Frankish conquests required legal frameworks that could govern diverse populations while preserving Frankish political supremacy and cultural identity. The Salic law, codified during Clovis's reign, represented the first systematic attempt to record Germanic legal traditions in written form, while adapting these customs to the complex circumstances of territorial rule over mixed populations. This law code addressed property rights, inheritance procedures, and criminal penalties according to principles that balanced traditional Frankish customs with practical requirements of governing settled agricultural communities. Salic law provisions regarding inheritance reflected Germanic concepts of kinship and property that would profoundly influence European political development. The exclusion of women from inheritance of royal authority, enshrined in the famous Salic succession principle, ensured that Frankish kingship remained within male lineages, while preventing the fragmentation of royal power through marriage alliances. Simultaneously, the code's detailed provisions regarding compensation for various crimes established monetary values for different social groups that preserved traditional Germanic social hierarchies while adapting to economic conditions in conquered Roman territories. The reign of Clovis established patterns of Frankish expansion and consolidation that his successors would follow throughout the 6th century, gradually absorbing remaining independent territories in Gaul while extending their influence into Germanic regions beyond the Rhine. The partition of the kingdom among Clovis's sons, following his death in 511 AD, reflected Germanic inheritance customs that treated royal authority as personal property divisible among legitimate heirs. Yet the continued cooperation between Merovingian branches prevented the complete fragmentation that weakened other barbarian kingdoms. The emergence of the Carolingian family as mayors of the palace during the 7th century marked a crucial transition in Frankish political development, as effective power shifted from Merovingian kings to their chief administrators who controlled military forces and managed royal resources. Charles Martel's assumption of authority around 714 AD coincided with renewed external threats that tested Frankish military capabilities and revealed the continued vitality of their warrior culture despite increasing administrative sophistication. The Islamic conquest of Visigothic Spain in 711 AD created an unprecedented challenge for Christian Europe, as Muslim armies crossed the Pyrenees and began systematic conquest of Aquitaine. These forces, combining Arab cavalry, Berber infantry and Visigothic defectors, employed tactical methods that proved devastatingly effective against traditional European military formations. Islamic armies moved with remarkable speed, capturing fortified cities through rapid assault techniques, while avoiding prolonged sieges that might allow Christian reinforcements to arrive. Charles Martel's response to Islamic expansion demonstrated the evolution of Frankish military organisation beyond traditional Germanic tribal warfare toward the professional armies that would characterise medieval European states. His forces included not only Frankish warriors, but also contingents from allied tribes, Christian refugees from conquered territories, and professional soldiers maintained through systematic taxation of agricultural production. This military synthesis created armies capable of sustained campaigns over vast distances while maintaining the tactical flexibility necessary to counter unfamiliar enemy methods. The Battle of Tours in 732 AD represented the climax of Islamic expansion into Europe and demonstrated the effectiveness of Frankish military reforms in countering sophisticated enemy forces. Charles Martel positioned his army on elevated ground that negated Islamic cavalry advantages while forcing Muslim forces to attack uphill against prepared defensive positions. Frankish infantry, fighting in dense formations with long spears and shields, proved capable of withstanding repeated cavalry charges while maintaining cohesion under extreme pressure. The tactical details of Tours reveal the extent to which Frankish warfare had evolved from individual combat toward coordinated unit actions that maximised collective strength while preserving opportunities for personal heroism. Frankish warriors fought in wedge formations that concentrated maximum force at specific points in enemy lines, yet these formations remained flexible enough to respond to changing battlefield conditions through rapid redeployment. The combination of disciplined formation fighting with individual combat skills created military capabilities that proved superior to both traditional Germanic tactics and Islamic cavalry methods. The aftermath of Tours established Charles Martel as the dominant figure in European politics, while demonstrating Frankish military superiority over the most formidable enemies of the age. His victory halted Islamic expansion into Central Europe, preserved Christian civilization north of the Pyrenees, and established the foundation for Carolingian imperial ambitions that would transform European political organisation. The battle's psychological impact extended far beyond immediate military consequences, creating a reputation for Frankish invincibility that facilitated subsequent diplomatic and military successes. Charles Martel's consolidation of power following Tours involved systematic campaigns against internal enemies that eliminated potential sources of resistance, while strengthening Frankish control over peripheral territories. His expeditions into Aquitaine, Burgundy and Bavaria demonstrated military capabilities that could project force across vast distances while maintaining supply lines and political control over conquered regions. These campaigns established administrative systems that balanced local autonomy with central authority, creating governmental structures that would provide the foundation for Carolingian imperial administration. The transition from Charles Martel to his son Pepin the Short marked another crucial phase in Frankish political development, as the Carolingians moved from de facto to de jure royal authority through alliance with the Catholic Church. Pepin's coronation in 751 AD conducted by papal legates with holy oil blessed by the Pope himself, created religious legitimacy that transcended traditional Germanic concepts of royal authority based solely on military success and noble birth. This ceremony established precedents for divine sanction of royal power that would characterize medieval European kingship for centuries. The donation of Pepin in 756 AD demonstrated the extent to which Frankish power had expanded beyond purely military considerations towards systematic territorial administration and diplomatic alliance building. Pepin's grant of central Italian territories to the papacy created the Papal States while establishing Frankish influence in Mediterranean politics that complemented their dominance north of the Alps. This arrangement provided mutual benefits that strengthened both Frankish royal authority and papal independence from Byzantine and Lombard pressure. The reign of Charlemagne, beginning in 768 AD, marked the culmination of 3 centuries of Frankish expansion and the creation of the first post-Roman Empire in Western Europe. His systematic conquest of Lombard Italy, Saxony, Bavaria, and Avar territories created a territorial state that rivaled the ancient Roman Empire in geographic extent, while surpassing it in administrative efficiency and military effectiveness. The coronation of Charlemagne as emperor on Christmas Day 800 AD symbolised the restoration of imperial authority in the West under Frankish leadership that combined Germanic warrior traditions with Roman administrative practices and Christian religious sanction. The establishment of Charlemagne's empire created unprecedented stability across Western Europe. Yet this very success would soon attract the attention of seafaring peoples from Scandinavia, whose revolutionary approach to warfare and exploration would terrorise Christian Europe for 3 centuries. The Viking Age erupted with shocking suddenness on June 8, 793 AD, when longships appeared off the Northumbrian coast and Norse raiders struck the monastery of Lindisfarne with devastating efficiency. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle recorded the attack with palpable horror. Never before has such terror appeared in Britain as we've now suffered from a pagan race. This assault marked not merely another barbarian raid, but the beginning of a new phase in European history, as Scandinavian warriors perfected maritime warfare techniques that rendered traditional coastal defences obsolete. The monastery of Lindisfarne represented everything that made Christian settlements attractive to Viking raiders: concentrated wealth, minimal defences, and religious significance that amplified the psychological impact of successful attacks. The monks had accumulated substantial treasures through centuries of royal patronage and pilgrimage donations, storing gold, silver, and precious manuscripts in stone buildings that provided no protection against determined assault. The raiders struck during morning prayers when the religious community was gathered in the church, achieving complete surprise that allowed systematic looting without significant resistance. Archaeological excavations at Lindisfarne reveal the thoroughness of Viking destruction, with burnt layers containing melted metal fragments and broken religious artefacts scattered throughout the monastic complex. The raiders demonstrated remarkable efficiency in identifying valuable items while destroying those they could not easily transport. Illuminated manuscripts were torn apart for their gold leaf and jewelled bindings, while stone altars were smashed to extract embedded precious metals. The violence extended beyond simple theft to deliberate desecration designed to terrorise Christian populations and demonstrate Norse contempt for foreign religious practices. The success at Lindisfarne established patterns of Viking raiding that would persist throughout the 9th century, with Norse forces targeting wealthy monasteries, trading centres, and royal estates while avoiding fortified positions that might offer serious resistance. These early raids relied on speed, surprise, and intimate knowledge of coastal geography that allowed Viking ships to appear without warning and disappear before effective countermeasures could be organised. The raiders typically struck during religious festivals when communities gathered for celebration, maximising both the available loot and the psychological impact of their attacks. Viking ship technology represented the crucial innovation that made these raids possible, combining shallow draft construction with seaworthy stability that allowed operations in both rivers and open ocean. The longship design evolved from centuries of Scandinavian boat-building tradition, incorporating features specifically adapted for warfare and exploration, rather than simple transportation. Archaeological discoveries of preserved vessels at sites like Gokstad and Oseberg reveal the sophisticated engineering principles that governed Norse shipwright techniques. The Gokstad ship, dating to approximately 890 AD, demonstrates the remarkable capabilities of Viking naval architecture through its combination of strength, speed, and versatility. At 76 feet in length with a beam of 17 feet, this vessel could carry a crew of 60 warriors while maintaining the shallow draft necessary for river navigation. The overlapping plank construction, secured with iron rivets and sealed with animal hair and tar, created hulls that remained watertight under extreme stress, while providing the flexibility necessary to handle rough seas. Viking navigation techniques combined practical seamanship with sophisticated understanding of natural phenomena that enabled accurate course keeping across vast ocean distances without magnetic compasses or detailed charts. Norse navigators relied on observation of wave patterns, wind directions, bird behaviour, and celestial movements to determine position and heading during extended voyages. The sun compass, a circular wooden disc marked with directional indicators, allowed precise course maintenance during daylight hours when combined with knowledge of seasonal solar movements. The use of ravens for land finding, documented in both archaeological evidence and saga literature, demonstrates the practical nature of Viking exploration methods. These birds, carried in cages aboard longships, would be released at regular intervals during ocean voyages. Ravens that returned to the ship indicated no land within flying range, while birds that failed to return suggested nearby coastlines worth investigating. This technique proved particularly valuable during the colonization of Iceland and the exploration of Greenland, where traditional navigation methods proved insufficient for locating landfall across unprecedented distances. Viking military organisation reflected their maritime capabilities through tactical systems designed to maximise the advantages of ship-based warfare. The basic unit of Viking military force was the ship's crew, typically 30 to 60 warriors who lived, fought, and died together under the leadership of a ship captain who commanded through demonstrated prowess rather than inherited authority. These crews developed extraordinary cohesion through shared dangers and mutual dependence during extended voyages, creating military formations that proved devastatingly effective in coordinated attacks on land targets. The famous berserkers represented the extreme manifestation of Viking warrior culture, fighters who entered battle in a trance-like state that rendered them apparently immune to pain and fear. Archaeological evidence from weapon deposits and burial sites reveals the ritual preparation that preceded berserker transformation, including consumption of psychoactive substances and performance of religious ceremonies designed to invoke divine possession. These warriors fought with axes, swords, and spears while wearing minimal armour, relying on their ferocious reputation and apparent invulnerability to break enemy formations through psychological intimidation. Viking weapons technology emphasized versatility and individual craftsmanship that reflected both practical combat requirements and cultural values regarding personal honor and martial skill. The characteristic Viking sword combined a long double-edged blade with elaborate hilt decoration that indicated the owner's wealth and status. Archaeological analysis of preserved weapons reveals sophisticated metallurgy involving pattern welding techniques that created blades of exceptional strength and flexibility. These swords often bore runic inscriptions, invoking divine protection or recording the weapon's history and previous owners. The Viking axe served as both weapon and tool, designed for effectiveness in shipboard combat, where space limitations prevented the use of longer weapons. Archaeological discoveries reveal numerous axe variations, from simple working tools adapted for warfare to elaborate ceremonial weapons decorated with silver inlay and runic symbols. The famous Danish axes, with their broad cutting edges and long handles, proved particularly effective against mail armour and shield walls, capable of cleaving through defensive formations that resisted sword and spear attacks. Viking social organisation operated through complex hierarchical systems that balanced individual achievement with collective responsibility in ways that supported both military effectiveness and economic productivity. At the apex stood the Jarls, warrior nobles who commanded ships and warbands while controlling substantial territories in their agricultural production. These leaders gained authority through military success, generous distribution of plunder, and the ability to attract and maintain loyal followers willing to risk their lives in pursuit of wealth and honour. The Carls formed the backbone of Viking society. Free farmers and craftsmen who owned land participated in local assemblies and served as warriors when circumstances required military action. These men possessed the economic resources necessary to equip themselves for warfare while maintaining the agricultural and craft production that sustained Scandinavian communities during the long winter months. Archaeological evidence from rural settlements reveals the prosperity that characterised Carl households, with substantial timber halls, specialised workshops, and storage facilities that indicate complex economic organisation. Thralls occupied the lowest position in Viking social hierarchy, slaves captured during raids or born into bondage who provided the manual labour that supported the warrior lifestyle of their masters. Archaeological evidence suggests that thralls comprised a substantial portion of Scandinavian population, perhaps 20 to 30% in some regions, indicating the extent to which Viking society depended on slave labour for basic economic functions. The treatment of thralls varied considerably according to their skills and the temperament of their owners, with some achieving positions of responsibility while others endured harsh conditions that frequently resulted in early death. Viking women enjoyed significantly higher status than their counterparts in contemporary Christian societies, possessing legal rights and social authority that reflected Germanic traditions regarding female autonomy and family responsibility. Archaeological evidence from female burials reveals the wealth and prestige associated with prominent women, including elaborate jewellery, household implements, and occasionally weapons that suggest participation in military activities. The famous warrior women described in saga literature, while possibly exaggerated, reflect cultural acceptance of female involvement in warfare that distinguished Scandinavian society from Mediterranean traditions. The role of women in Viking exploration and colonisation proved crucial to the success of overseas settlement, as female participation in long-distance migration provided the demographic foundation necessary for permanent communities rather than temporary raiding bases. Archaeological evidence from Iceland, Greenland, and other Norse colonies reveals the presence of women from the earliest phases of settlement, indicating family-based migration rather than purely military expeditions. These women brought essential skills in textile production, food preparation, and household management that proved vital for survival in harsh frontier environments. Norse religious beliefs provided ideological foundation for Viking expansion through mythological frameworks that celebrated warfare, exploration, and death in battle as paths to divine favour and eternal glory. The pantheon of Norse gods reflected the values and concerns of warrior society, with Odin serving as patron of battle, wisdom, and death, while Thor protected human communities against supernatural threats. Archaeological evidence from religious sites reveals the complexity of Norse ritual practices, including elaborate sacrificial ceremonies and divination techniques that guided important decisions regarding warfare and exploration. Valhalla, the hall of the slain where warriors who died gloriously in battle would feast with the gods while preparing for Ragnarok, provided religious motivation for the extraordinary courage that characterized Viking warfare. This belief system encouraged acceptance of death in combat, while emphasizing the importance of achieving fame through heroic deeds that would ensure remembrance by future generations. The concept of a glorious death proved particularly important during dangerous voyages and desperate battles, where survival seemed impossible but honour remained achievable. The gradual Christianization of Scandinavia represented a fundamental transformation that ultimately ended the Viking Age, while preserving many elements of Norse culture within new religious frameworks. The conversion process began through contact with Christian merchants and missionaries, but accelerated dramatically when Scandinavian kings recognised the political advantages of adopting the religion of their southern neighbours. Archaeological evidence reveals the gradual replacement of pagan burial practices with Christian ceremonies, though many Norse cultural elements persisted within Christianised contexts. King Olaf Tryggvason of Norway emerged as a crucial figure in Scandinavian Christianization, using his authority as a successful Viking leader to promote religious conversion throughout his territories. His own conversion occurred during exile in England, where he experienced the political and military advantages that Christian rulers enjoyed through their connections with continental European powers. Upon returning to Norway in 995 AD, Olaf systematically destroyed pagan temples while establishing Christian churches and appointing bishops who could provide religious authority for his political reforms. The methods employed by Olaf Tryggvason in promoting Christianity reflected the violent nature of religious transformation in warrior societies, where traditional beliefs were intimately connected with political authority and social identity. Archaeological evidence from destroyed pagan sites reveals the thoroughness of Christian iconoclasm, with smashed religious artifacts and burned temple foundations marking the deliberate elimination of competing religious systems. Olaf's forces demolished sacred groves, destroyed religious sculptures, and executed priests who refused to abandon traditional practices. Olaf II Haraldsson, later canonized as Saint Olaf, continued his predecessor's Christianization efforts through systematic legal and administrative reforms that embedded Christian principles within Norwegian governmental structures. His law codes replaced traditional Germanic legal procedures with Christian alternatives that emphasized royal authority derived from divine sanction, rather than military success alone. Archaeological evidence from churches built during his reign reveals the substantial resources devoted to Christian construction projects that demonstrated royal commitment to the new religion. The establishment of Christian kingship in Scandinavia fundamentally altered the political dynamics that had sustained Viking expansion for 3 centuries. Christian rulers found themselves bound by religious obligations that discouraged raiding against fellow Christians, while encouraging diplomatic relationships that reduced opportunities for profitable warfare. The transformation of warrior kings into Christian monarchs required new sources of legitimacy and revenue that gradually replaced the plunder-based economy that had characterized the Viking Age. Viking exploration achievements extended far beyond their reputation as raiders, encompassing systematic colonization efforts that established Norse settlements from Greenland to the Black Sea. The settlement of Iceland, beginning around 870 AD, represented the first major Viking colonization project, involving the transportation of entire communities across dangerous ocean distances to establish permanent settlements in previously uninhabited territories. Archaeological evidence reveals the remarkable success of this endeavour, with Norse colonists creating a functioning society that preserved Scandinavian culture while adapting to unique environmental conditions. The Icelandic settlement process demonstrates the organisational capabilities that distinguished Viking expansion from simple raiding expeditions. The colonists transported not only people and essential supplies, but also livestock, seeds, and household goods necessary for establishing self-sufficient communities. Archaeological excavations of early Icelandic farmsteads reveal sophisticated planning that maximised agricultural potential while providing protection against harsh weather conditions that could prove fatal to unprepared settlers. Eric the Red's exploration and colonisation of Greenland around 985 AD pushed Viking expansion to its geographic limits, establishing settlements on the edge of the Arctic that survived for nearly 5 centuries despite extraordinary environmental challenges. The success of Greenlandic colonisation required technological adaptations that combined traditional Scandinavian techniques with innovations developed specifically for Arctic conditions. Archaeological evidence from Norse Greenland reveals sophisticated hunting strategies, specialised architecture, and trade relationships that sustained European communities at the limits of medieval technological capabilities. The discovery and attempted colonisation of Vinland, identified with areas of North America, represented the ultimate achievement of Viking exploration and demonstrated the remarkable range of Norse maritime capabilities. Archaeological evidence from Lonzo Meadows in Newfoundland confirms the presence of Norse settlers in North America around 1000 AD, making them the first Europeans to establish settlements in the New World. The temporary nature of these settlements reflects the practical difficulties of maintaining supply lines across such vast distances, rather than any lack of Viking determination or capability. Viking trade networks extended from Greenland to Constantinople, creating commercial relationships that connected diverse cultures through exchange of goods, ideas, and technologies. Archaeological discoveries of Arabic silver coins in Scandinavian hoards demonstrate the extent of Viking commercial activities, with Norse merchants travelling down Russian rivers to reach Byzantine and Islamic markets. These trading expeditions often combined commercial and military activities, with the same men serving as merchants during peaceful periods and warriors when circumstances required violence. The establishment of the Kievan Rus by Swedish Vikings represents one of the most significant political achievements of Scandinavian expansion, creating a state that controlled vast territories from the Baltic to the Black Sea while serving as a crucial link between Northern Europe and the Byzantine Empire. Archaeological evidence from Novgorod and other Russian cities reveals the extent of Scandinavian influence on early Russian political development, with Norse burial practices, architectural techniques, and material culture persisting for centuries after initial settlement. The transformation of Vikings from raiders into rulers occurred gradually throughout the 9th and 10th centuries as successful war leaders established permanent bases that evolved into territorial kingdoms. Yet while Scandinavian warriors carved out domains across Western Europe and the Atlantic Islands, another massive demographic transformation was reshaping the vast forests and river valleys of Eastern Europe. The Slavic migrations represented one of history's most extensive population movements, as agricultural peoples spread from their ancestral homeland in the Pripyat marshes across territories stretching from the Baltic Sea to the Balkans, fundamentally altering the ethnic composition of half the European continent. The origins of Slavic expansion remain partially obscured by the limitations of written sources and the archaeological challenges of tracking agricultural peoples who left fewer distinctive material remains than their warrior neighbours. The Pripyat marshes, located in what is now southern Belarus and northern Ukraine, provided the demographic reservoir from which Slavic populations would eventually colonize territories extending from the Elbe River to the Volga. This marshy region, with its intricate network of rivers, lakes and wetlands, offered protection from nomadic raiders, while providing fertile agricultural land that supported growing populations during the crucial centuries of early Slavic development. Archaeological evidence from the Pripyat region reveals the gradual evolution of distinctively Slavic material culture during the 4th through 6th centuries AD. Excavations at sites like Korchak and Penkovka have uncovered ceramic assemblages, settlement patterns, and burial practices that distinguish early Slavic communities from their Germanic, Baltic, and nomadic neighbours. The characteristic Slavic pottery, featuring simple forms with minimal decoration, reflects practical ceramic traditions adapted to the needs of agricultural communities, rather than the elaborate decorative styles favoured by warrior elites among other peoples. Slavic agricultural techniques emphasise crop cultivation and animal husbandry methods specifically adapted to the forest-steppe environment that characterised much of Eastern Europe. Archaeological analysis of pollen samples and agricultural implements reveals sophisticated understanding of soil management, crop rotation, and seasonal cultivation cycles that maximised agricultural productivity in regions with relatively short growing seasons. The Slavic emphasis on rye cultivation proved particularly significant. as this hardy grain could thrive in acidic soils and harsh climatic conditions that made wheat cultivation unreliable. The expansion of Slavic populations from their Pripet homeland occurred through gradual migration and colonization, rather than the dramatic military conquests that characterized Germanic and nomadic movements. Slavic agricultural communities moved slowly eastward, northward, and southward, clearing forests, establishing villages, and adapting their farming techniques to diverse geographical environments. This process unfolded over several centuries, with different Slavic groups developing distinct cultural characteristics while maintaining linguistic and cultural connections that preserved their common heritage. The northward movement of Slavic peoples into the forest zones of what would become Russia encountered minimal resistance from the sparse Finno-Ugric populations who had previously dominated these territories. Archaeological evidence suggests peaceful coexistence and gradual assimilation rather than violent conquest, with Slavic agricultural techniques complementing Finno-Ugric hunting and fishing practices. The abundance of land and natural resources in these northern forests reduced competition between different ethnic groups, while providing opportunities for economic specialization that benefited all participants. Slavic settlement patterns reflected their agricultural focus through village organization that emphasized collective farming and shared resources. Archaeological excavations reveal settlements consisting of semi-subterranean houses arranged around central areas used for grain storage and livestock protection. These villages typically contained between 10 and 30 households, representing extended family groups that cooperated in agricultural activities while maintaining individual property rights over specific plots of land. The construction techniques employed in Slavic houses, utilizing timber frames with wattle and daub walls, demonstrated sophisticated understanding of local building materials and climatic requirements. The social organization of early Slavic communities operated through kinship-based structures that balanced individual family autonomy with collective decision-making regarding agricultural activities and external relations. The basic unit of Slavic society was the extended family, or zadruga, which included multiple generations living in close proximity while sharing agricultural labour and resources. These family groups formed the foundation of larger tribal organisations that could coordinate military defence and territorial expansion when circumstances required collective action. Slavic tribal assemblies, known as veche, provided mechanisms for community decision-making that involved all adult males in discussions regarding important issues affecting the group's welfare. Archaeological evidence from fortified settlements suggests that these assemblies met within defensive enclosures that could protect participants during times of external threat. The democratic character of veche proceedings reflected egalitarian traditions that distinguished Slavic political organisation from the hierarchical warrior societies that dominated among Germanic and nomadic peoples. The military organisation of Slavic tribes emphasised defensive warfare and guerrilla tactics adapted to forest environments where traditional cavalry and infantry formations proved ineffective. Slavic warriors fought primarily on foot using spears, axes and bows, while avoiding pitched battles that might expose their forces to destruction by better equipped enemies. Archaeological discoveries of weapon hoards reveal the relatively simple military equipment employed by Slavic fighters, with emphasis on practical weapons that could serve dual purposes as agricultural tools during peaceful periods. Slavic fortification techniques developed in response to external threats from nomadic raiders and Germanic warbands who periodically penetrated Slavic territories in search of slaves and plunder. The characteristic Slavic stronghold, or grad, consisted of earthen ramparts topped with wooden palisades and surrounded by ditches that channeled attackers into killing zones where defenders could employ missile weapons effectively. These fortifications often incorporated natural features like hilltops, river bends or marsh edges that enhanced their defensive capabilities while requiring minimal construction effort. The religious beliefs of early Slavic peoples centered on animistic traditions that recognized spiritual forces inhabiting natural features like forests, rivers, and mountains. Archaeological evidence from cult sites reveals sophisticated ritual practices involving wooden idols, sacred groves, and seasonal ceremonies that marked important agricultural transitions. The Slavic pantheon included numerous deities associated with specific aspects of natural phenomena and human activities, with Perun serving as the primary god of thunder and warfare, while Svarog governed fire and metalworking. Perun occupied the supreme position in Slavic religious hierarchy, representing the cosmic forces of storm and lightning that brought both destruction and renewal to the natural world. Archaeological discoveries of cult objects dedicated to this deity reveal the widespread nature of Perun worship across Slavic territories, with similar ritual artifacts appearing from the Baltic to the Black Sea. The god's association with oak trees led to the establishment of sacred groves where important religious ceremonies were conducted, including human sacrifices offered during times of crisis or major seasonal transitions. Svarog represented the divine smith who created the world through his mastery of fire and metalworking, providing Slavic communities with the knowledge necessary for agricultural and military success. Archaeological evidence from metalworking sites reveals the ritual significance attributed to iron production, with special ceremonies accompanying the construction of forges and the creation of important tools or weapons. The association between divine favour and technological skill encouraged the development of sophisticated metallurgical techniques that produced high-quality agricultural implements and military equipment. Dazbog served as the solar deity who governed agricultural fertility and the seasonal cycles that determined crop success or failure. Slavic farmers conducted elaborate rituals designed to ensure Dazbog's favour during crucial agricultural periods, including spring planting ceremonies and harvest festivals that involved entire communities and collective religious observances. Archaeological discoveries of ritual deposits containing agricultural tools and food offerings demonstrate the central role of solar worship in Slavic religious practice. Veles represented the god of cattle, wealth, and the underworld, serving as patron of merchants and protector of livestock that provided essential resources for Slavic communities. The cult of Veles involved complex rituals designed to ensure the prosperity of herds and the success of trading expeditions that connected Slavic territories with distant markets. Archaeological evidence reveals the widespread veneration of this deity through discoveries of cattle skulls and other offerings in contexts suggesting religious, rather than purely economic significance. Slavic seasonal festivals reflected the agricultural focus of these communities through elaborate ceremonies marking crucial transitions in the farming cycle. The spring festival of Maslenitsa celebrated the end of winter and the beginning of agricultural activities, involving community feasts, ritual burning of winter symbols, and ceremonies designed to ensure divine favour for the coming growing season. Archaeological evidence from settlement sites reveals the community spaces where these festivals occurred, with large central areas capable of accommodating entire villages for collective celebrations. The summer solstice festival of Kupala involved elaborate water ceremonies that combined agricultural magic with community bonding activities designed to strengthen social cohesion during the crucial period of crop growth. Participants would leap over bonfires, float flower wreaths on rivers, and conduct ritual bathing that symbolically purified the community while invoking divine protection for their crops. Archaeological discoveries of ritual sites near water sources reveal the sacred geography that governed these ceremonies, with specific locations chosen for their spiritual significance, rather than practical convenience. The harvest festival of Dozhinki marked the completion of agricultural activities and the beginning of winter preparations that would sustain communities through the harsh months ahead. These celebrations involved elaborate displays of agricultural abundance, competitive activities that demonstrated individual and community prosperity, and religious ceremonies thanking the gods for successful harvests. Archaeological evidence from storage facilities reveals the sophisticated preservation techniques that allowed Slavic communities to maintain adequate food supplies throughout extended winter periods. The expansion of Slavic peoples into the Balkan Peninsula during the 6th and 7th centuries AD brought them into direct contact with the Byzantine Empire, creating complex relationships that combined military conflict with cultural exchange and gradual assimilation. The initial Slavic penetration of Byzantine territories occurred through systematic raids that exploited the empire's preoccupation with Persian and Arab threats, allowing Slavic warbands to establish permanent settlements in regions where imperial authority had collapsed. Archaeological evidence from Balkan sites reveals the transformation of Roman urban centres under Slavic occupation, with classical architectural forms gradually replaced by Slavic construction techniques adapted to local conditions. The process involved neither complete destruction nor simple continuity, but rather cultural synthesis that preserved useful Roman technologies while adapting them to Slavic social and economic requirements. Excavations at sites like Karasingrad demonstrate the complexity of this transformation, with Slavic pottery and building techniques appearing alongside continued use of Roman infrastructure and administrative systems. The Slavic settlement of the Balkans proceeded through gradual infiltration, rather than massive military campaigns, with small groups of colonists establishing agricultural communities in areas where Byzantine control had weakened. These settlements often coexisted with surviving Roman populations, creating mixed communities that facilitated cultural exchange while preserving distinct ethnic identities. Archaeological analysis reveals the gradual adoption of Byzantine agricultural techniques and craft traditions by Slavic settlers, while Roman populations learned Slavic language and customs that proved advantageous for survival in the changing political environment. The emergence of early Slavic states represented the culmination of centuries of political development that transformed tribal confederations into territorial kingdoms capable of competing with established powers. Great Moravia, established in the 9th century AD under Prince Mojmir, demonstrated the potential for Slavic political organisation to create centralised authority over vast territories while preserving traditional cultural practices. Archaeological evidence from Moravian strongholds reveals sophisticated administrative systems that combined Slavic customary law with Byzantine governmental techniques learned through diplomatic and commercial contacts. The capital of Great Moravia, Mikulcice, exemplified the architectural achievements of early Slavic state formation, with massive earthen fortifications protecting a complex of palaces, churches and administrative buildings that rivaled contemporary Carolingian and Byzantine centres. Archaeological excavations have revealed the sophisticated urban planning that characterised this site, with specialised quarters for different crafts and administrative functions, connected by paved roads and supplied with elaborate water management systems. The presence of luxury goods from across Europe demonstrates the extensive trade networks that sustained Moravian prosperity, while providing resources for continued territorial expansion. The Christianization of Great Moravia under Prince Rastislav marked a crucial transformation in Slavic religious and cultural development, as Byzantine missionaries introduced literacy and sophisticated theological concepts that complemented traditional Slavic spiritual practices. The mission of Saints Cyril and Methodius in 863 AD established the foundation for Slavic Christian culture through their creation of the Glagolitic alphabet specifically designed for Slavic languages. Archaeological discoveries of early Christian manuscripts and church foundations reveal the rapid spread of literacy and Christian architectural techniques throughout Moravian territories. The development of Old Church Slavonic as a liturgical language represented an unprecedented achievement in medieval European cultural history, as Slavic peoples became the first barbarian group to receive Christian scriptures and liturgy in their own language, rather than Latin or Greek. This innovation facilitated the rapid spread of Christianity among Slavic populations, while preserving linguistic and cultural distinctiveness that distinguished Slavic Christianity from its Roman and Byzantine counterparts. Archaeological evidence from the religious sites reveals the synthesis of Christian and traditional Slavic architectural elements that characterized this unique religious culture. The First Bulgarian Empire emerged as another major center of Slavic state formation, demonstrating the adaptability of Slavic political organisation to diverse geographical and cultural environments. The establishment of Bulgarian authority over the Slavic tribes south of the Danube created a powerful state that successfully challenged Byzantine control over the Balkan Peninsula, while developing distinctive cultural and religious traditions. Archaeological evidence from Bulgarian strongholds reveals the military and administrative sophistication that enabled this state to maintain independence against both Byzantine and nomadic pressure for several centuries. The Bulgarian capital at Pliska exemplified the architectural ambitions of early Slavic rulers, with massive stone fortifications enclosing an area of over 20 square kilometres that included palaces, administrative buildings, and religious structures decorated with elaborate stone carving and metalwork. Archaeological excavations have revealed the sophisticated engineering techniques employed in Bulgarian construction, including advanced water management systems, elaborate heating arrangements, and defensive works that incorporated both Slavic and Byzantine military architecture. The scale of these constructions demonstrates the substantial resources that Bulgarian rulers could mobilize for monumental building projects. The conversion of Bulgaria to Christianity under Khan Boris II in 864 AD established another centre of Slavic Christian culture that competed with both Rome and Constantinople for religious authority over the Slavic peoples. The Bulgarian adoption of Christianity involved complex negotiations with both Byzantine and Frankish authorities, as Boris sought to maximise his political independence while securing the religious legitimacy that Christian conversion provided. Archaeological evidence from Bulgarian churches reveals the distinctive architectural synthesis that emerged from this process, combining Byzantine construction techniques with Slavic decorative traditions and local building materials. The emergence of Kievan Rus represented the most extensive achievement of early Slavic state formation, creating a political entity that controlled territories from the Baltic to the Black Sea while maintaining commercial and cultural connections with both Scandinavia and Byzantium. The establishment of this state involved complex interactions between Slavic agricultural communities and Scandinavian warrior elites, who provided military leadership and commercial expertise. Archaeological evidence reveals the gradual fusion of these different cultural elements into a distinctive Rus civilization that preserved Slavic social foundations while adopting external political and military innovations. The commercial significance of Kievan Rus reflected its strategic position along the river routes that connected northern Europe with the Byzantine Empire and the Islamic world. Archaeological discoveries of trading posts and market centres reveal the sophisticated commercial networks that sustained Rus prosperity while providing resources for territorial expansion and urban development. The famous route from the Varangians to the Greeks facilitated the exchange of northern products like furs, honey, and amber for southern luxury goods including silk, spices, and precious metals that enhanced the prestige of Rus rulers while supporting their warrior retinues. The conversion of Kievan Rus to Christianity under Prince Vladimir I represented more than religious transformation. It exemplified the fundamental metamorphosis occurring across Europe as barbarian societies evolved from tribal confederations into sophisticated kingdoms that would form the backbone of medieval civilization. This transformation required delicate balancing acts as Germanic, Slavic, and other peoples adapted Roman administrative systems while preserving the warrior customs and legal traditions that defined their cultural identity. The process proved neither uniform nor simple, involving centuries of experimentation, conflict, and synthesis that created entirely new forms of governance. The Visigothic kingdom in Hispania demonstrated the complexity of this administrative fusion through its evolution from Alaric's wandering confederation into a territorial state governing diverse populations across the Iberian Peninsula. King Uric's law code of 475 AD established the first systematic attempt to govern Roman and Germanic populations under unified legal authority while preserving distinct legal traditions for each group. The code addressed property disputes, inheritance rights, and criminal procedures through parallel systems that allowed Romans to follow traditional imperial law, while Goths maintained their customary practices regarding blood feuds, compensation payments, and warrior obligations. Archaeological evidence from Visigothic administrative centres reveals the practical implementation of this dual system through the preservation of Roman bureaucratic infrastructure, alongside Germanic political hierarchies. Excavations at sites like Rhocopolis, founded by King Liuvigild in 578 AD, demonstrate the continuation of Roman urban planning principles, combined with Germanic fortification techniques and architectural preferences. The city featured traditional Roman amenities including baths, aqueducts, and paved streets, yet its defensive walls incorporated Germanic engineering methods, while the royal palace complex reflected barbarian concepts of royal authority and ceremonial display. The Visigothic administrative apparatus relied heavily on Roman bureaucratic expertise, while adapting imperial procedures to Germanic concepts of personal loyalty and kinship obligation. Former Roman officials continued to manage taxation, judicial proceedings, and territorial administration under Gothic supervision, creating hybrid governmental systems that preserved imperial efficiency while accommodating barbarian political traditions. The commissivitatis, a position combining Roman civil authority with Germanic military command, exemplified this fusion by granting individual administrators broad powers over specific territories while maintaining their accountability to Gothic royal authority. Visigothic military organisations similarly blended Roman tactical discipline with Germanic warrior culture through the creation of professional armies that preserved traditional fighting methods while adopting imperial equipment and training procedures. The Exercitus Gothorum combined Gothic noble cavalry with Roman-trained infantry units supported by siege engines operated by specialists familiar with imperial engineering techniques. Archaeological discoveries of military equipment reveal the gradual standardization of weapons and armor that reflected both Roman manufacturing techniques and Germanic decorative preferences. The integration of Roman and Germanic legal traditions proved particularly challenging in areas concerning marriage, property rights, and religious observance, where fundamental cultural differences required careful negotiation to prevent social conflict. The Breviary of Alaric attempted to resolve these tensions by codifying simplified versions of Roman law that eliminated provisions incompatible with Germanic customs, while preserving essential legal principles that governed commercial transactions and administrative procedures. This legal synthesis created precedents that influenced European jurisprudence for centuries, establishing patterns of customary law that balanced traditional practices with practical requirements of territorial governance. Visigothic religious policy underwent dramatic transformation as Arian rulers gradually recognized the political advantages of Catholic orthodoxy in governing predominantly Roman populations. King Ricard's conversion to Catholicism in 589 AD eliminated the primary source of religious tension between Gothic rulers and their subjects, while facilitating integration with Frankish and Byzantine political systems. The Third Council of Toledo, convened to formalize this conversion, established religious unity that strengthened royal authority, while creating opportunities for Gothic nobles to intermarry with Roman aristocratic families. The architectural evidence from Visigothic churches demonstrates the cultural synthesis that accompanied religious conversion, with Germanic construction techniques adapted to Catholic liturgical requirements while preserving distinctive barbarian decorative traditions. Churches like San Juan de Banos, built by King Resuswinth in 661 AD, combined Roman basilica design with Germanic stonework techniques and decorative motifs that reflected the fusion of Christian theology with traditional barbarian artistic preferences. The elaborate stone carving that characterized these buildings incorporated Germanic animal motifs and geometric patterns alongside Christian symbols, creating artistic traditions that influenced European religious architecture throughout the medieval period. The Frankish kingdom under the Merovingians developed alternative approaches to Romano-Germanic integration, that emphasized military cooperation and economic partnership, rather than systematic legal codification. Frankish kings maintained traditional Germanic assemblies for important political decisions, while employing Roman administrative personnel to manage taxation, judicial proceedings, and territorial governance. This arrangement preserved Germanic concepts of consensual rule while utilizing Roman bureaucratic expertise to govern complex territorial states that included diverse ethnic populations. Frankish military organisation retained its emphasis on personal loyalty and warrior bands, while adapting to the requirements of territorial defence and systematic conquest. The Trustes Regis, elite warriors bound to the king through personal oaths, formed the core of Frankish armies, while auxiliary forces included Roman recruits, allied barbarian contingents, and local militias organised according to traditional imperial procedures. Archaeological evidence from Frankish weapon deposits reveals the continued importance of individual combat skills and personal equipment quality, alongside increasing standardization of military gear that reflected Roman manufacturing techniques. The famous Francisca remained the distinctive weapon of Frankish warriors throughout this period, yet archaeological analysis reveals gradual changes in metallurgy and design that incorporated Roman blacksmithing techniques, while preserving the weapon's traditional form and cultural significance. Frankish smiths developed improved steel alloys and heat treatment methods that enhanced weapon performance while maintaining the distinctive balance and throwing characteristics that made the Francisca effective in both individual combat and formation fighting. The persistence of this traditional weapon, alongside adoption of Roman military technology, demonstrates the selective nature of cultural adaptation that characterized barbarian transformation. Frankish legal development followed patterns distinct from Visigothic codification, emphasizing oral tradition and customary procedures that preserved Germanic concepts of justice, while adapting to the practical requirements of governing settled agricultural populations. The Salic law represented written codification of traditional Frankish customs rather than systematic legal reform, preserving ancient procedures for dispute resolution while establishing monetary compensation rates that reflected economic conditions in conquered Roman territories. The law's detailed provisions regarding inheritance, property rights, and criminal penalties demonstrate sophisticated understanding of social relationships while maintaining distinctively Germanic approaches to justice and community responsibility. The role of Christianity in transforming barbarian societies extended far beyond simple religious conversion to encompass fundamental changes in political authority, social organisation, and cultural identity that reshaped European civilization. Missionary activities among Germanic peoples required careful adaptation of Christian theology to barbarian cultural frameworks, creating synthetic religious traditions that preserved essential Christian doctrines while accommodating traditional spiritual practices and social customs. The success of these missions depended largely on the ability of Christian teachers to demonstrate the practical advantages of their religion while respecting existing cultural values and social hierarchies. The conversion of Clovis and the Frankish nobility exemplified the political dimensions of barbarian Christianization, as religious transformation provided opportunities for diplomatic alliance with Catholic populations while legitimizing royal authority through divine sanction. The baptism ceremony at Reims established precedents for Christian kingship that combined Germanic concepts of personal loyalty with Roman imperial traditions of divine appointment, creating new forms of political authority that proved more stable and effective than purely traditional barbarian leadership. Archaeological evidence from Frankish royal burials reveals the gradual adoption of Christian burial practices alongside preservation of traditional grave goods and ceremonial weapons that reflected the synthetic nature of barbarian Christian culture. Missionary strategies among Germanic peoples emphasized practical benefits of Christian conversion rather than theological argumentation, demonstrating how Christian communities achieve prosperity, military success, and social stability through divine favour. St. Boniface's mission to the Germanic tribes east of the Rhine employed dramatic demonstrations of Christian power, including the famous destruction of Thor's oak at Geismar, to convince pagan audiences of Christianity's superiority over traditional religious practices. Archaeological evidence from destroyed pagan cult sites reveals the systematic nature of these conversion campaigns, with Christian churches frequently constructed on the foundations of demolished heathen temples to symbolize religious transformation while preserving sacred geographical associations. The establishment of monasteries throughout former barbarian territories created centers of learning, agricultural innovation, and cultural preservation that facilitated the integration of Germanic customs with Christian civilization. Monasteries like Fulda, founded by St. Sturm under Boniface's direction, served multiple functions, including religious education, manuscript preservation, agricultural development, and diplomatic communication between barbarian kingdoms and established Christian authorities. Archaeological excavations of monastic sites reveal the sophisticated economic organization that sustained these communities, with extensive workshops, storage facilities, and agricultural installations that demonstrated advanced techniques for land management and craft production. Monastic communities played crucial roles in preserving and transmitting classical learning, while adapting Roman educational methods to barbarian cultural contexts. The scriptorium at monasteries like Corbie and Saint Denis produced illuminated manuscripts that combined Christian theological texts with Germanic artistic traditions, creating distinctive cultural products that reflected the synthesis of classical learning with barbarian aesthetic preferences. These manuscripts preserved not only religious literature, but also classical texts on agriculture, medicine, and natural philosophy that provided essential knowledge for the development of medieval European civilization. The adaptation of Roman agricultural techniques to Germanic settlement patterns required significant modifications that reflected different concepts of land ownership, community organization, and agricultural practice. Germanic peoples traditionally emphasized cattle herding and shifting cultivation that maximize flexibility while minimizing investment in permanent infrastructure. Yet settlement in former Roman territories required adoption of intensive farming methods that could support larger populations on fixed territorial bases. Archaeological evidence from Germanic settlements reveals the gradual development of hybrid agricultural systems that combined Roman techniques for grain cultivation with Germanic methods for livestock management and forest exploitation. The three-field system that became characteristic of medieval European agriculture represented a synthesis of Roman farming knowledge with Germanic concepts of community land management and seasonal labour organisation. This system required sophisticated coordination between individual farmers and community authorities to ensure proper crop rotation, fallow management, and collective harvesting that maximised agricultural productivity while preserving soil fertility. Archaeological analysis of field systems and settlement patterns reveals the gradual implementation of these techniques across former barbarian territories, with local variations that reflected specific environmental conditions and cultural preferences. Germanic legal traditions concerning property rights and inheritance required fundamental adaptation to accommodate the requirements of intensive agriculture and permanent settlement. Traditional Germanic law emphasized personal property and movable goods, while treating land as community resource available for temporary use. Yet territorial settlement required individual ownership rights that encouraged investment in agricultural improvements and permanent construction. The development of allodial land tenure represented a compromise between Germanic customary law and Roman property concepts, granting individual ownership rights while preserving community obligations regarding military service and judicial participation. The emergence of feudal relationships from Germanic comitatus traditions demonstrated the adaptability of barbarian social institutions to the requirements of territorial governance and agricultural administration. The personal bonds that connected Germanic warriors to their chiefs provided the foundation for feudal contracts that granted land tenure in exchange for military service, creating hierarchical relationships that could govern complex territorial states while preserving traditional concepts of personal loyalty and mutual obligation. Archaeological evidence from aristocratic residences reveals the evolution of Germanic halls into fortified manor houses that served both residential and administrative functions, while maintaining the ceremonial importance of communal feasting and warrior gatherings. The transformation of barbarian art and material culture reflected the broader synthesis occurring in political, religious and social spheres, as Germanic peoples adapted to life within Christian territorial kingdoms. The animal style that characterized early Germanic metalwork gradually incorporated Christian symbols and Mediterranean decorative motifs, while preserving traditional techniques and aesthetic principles that maintain cultural continuity. Archaeological discoveries from aristocratic burials reveal the sophisticated craftsmanship that characterized this transitional period, with jewellery, weapons and ceremonial objects that demonstrated technical mastery while reflecting the cultural fusion occurring throughout barbarian society. The development of vernacular literature in Germanic languages represented another crucial aspect of cultural transformation, as traditional oral poetry adapted to Christian themes while preserving ancient heroic values and narrative structures. Works like Beowulf demonstrate the complex relationship between pagan heroic traditions and Christian moral frameworks, creating literary syntheses that preserve Germanic cultural memory while adapting to new religious contexts. The manuscript preservation of these texts in monastic scriptoria ensured their survival while demonstrating the integration of barbarian cultural traditions within Christian educational systems. The gradual transformation of barbarian kingdoms into the foundation of medieval European political organisation required centuries of experimentation, adaptation, and synthesis that created entirely new forms of civilization. The Carolingian Empire represented the culmination of this process, combining Frankish military traditions with Roman administrative systems and Christian religious authority to create a political entity that could claim legitimate succession to imperial authority while maintaining distinctively barbarian characteristics. Archaeological evidence from Carolingian palaces and administrative centres reveals the sophisticated governmental systems that emerged from this synthesis, with architectural programs that combined Germanic ceremonial requirements with Roman administrative efficiency and Christian symbolic authority. The coronation of Charlemagne as emperor in 800 AD symbolised the successful transformation of barbarian society into the foundation of medieval European civilization. Yet this achievement preserved essential elements of Germanic culture within new political and religious frameworks. The Carolingian court maintained traditional Germanic assemblies, warrior ceremonies, and legal procedures while adapting these institutions to the requirements of governing vast territories and diverse populations. However, the true understanding of this remarkable transformation would become obscured by centuries of historical distortion, romantic mythologizing, and deliberate political manipulation that created enduring misconceptions about the nature and significance of barbarian peoples in European development. The emergence of Romantic nationalism during the 19th century fundamentally altered European understanding of barbarian history through systematic distortion designed to serve contemporary political objectives rather than historical accuracy. German scholars and writers, seeking to establish cultural foundations for emerging German national identity, transformed the complex realities of ancient Germanic societies into simplified heroic narratives that emphasized racial purity, martial virtue, and cultural superiority over Roman decadence. The Brothers Grimm collected and edited Germanic folklore with explicit intention of demonstrating the spiritual superiority of German folk traditions over foreign influences, creating literary works that bore little resemblance to actual medieval sources, yet profoundly influenced popular understanding of barbarian culture. The Romantic movement's treatment of barbarian history reflected broader European anxieties about industrialization, urbanization, and political fragmentation that characterized the post-Napoleonic period. Writers like Friedrich Schiller and historians like Leopold von Ranke portrayed ancient Germanic peoples as embodying natural virtues lost in modern civilization: courage, loyalty, simplicity, and connection to the land, that contrasted favourably with contemporary urban corruption and political complexity. These idealised portrayals systematically ignored archaeological evidence regarding barbarian violence, slavery, human sacrifice, and internal conflict, while emphasising selected aspects of Germanic culture that supported nationalist political agendas. The influence of Romantic nationalism extended beyond Germany to affect historical interpretation throughout Europe, as French, English, and other national traditions developed parallel mythologies that glorified their own barbarian ancestors while demonising traditional enemies. French historians celebrated the Franks as founders of European civilization, while minimising Germanic contributions to Carolingian success. English scholars emphasised Anglo-Saxon democratic traditions, while ignoring evidence of systematic violence against Celtic populations. These competing national narratives created mutually incompatible versions of barbarian history that served political purposes rather than advancing historical understanding. The political exploitation of barbarian history reached its most extreme form during the 20th century, when totalitarian movements appropriated selected elements of Germanic culture to justify racial theories and territorial expansion. The systematic distortion of archaeological evidence, linguistic research, and historical documentation created entirely fictional narratives about barbarian racial superiority and cultural achievement that bore no relationship to actual historical evidence. These political manipulations contaminated scholarly research for decades, while creating popular misconceptions that persist in various forms despite overwhelming and contradictory evidence from modern archaeological and genetic research. Modern archaeological discoveries have systematically challenged traditional narratives about barbarian primitiveness through material evidence that reveals sophisticated technologies, complex social organisation, and remarkable artistic achievement among peoples previously dismissed as savage raiders. Excavations at sites like Gudme in Denmark have uncovered evidence of specialised craft production, extensive trade networks, and ceremonial complexes that demonstrate levels of social complexity comparable to contemporary Roman settlements. The discovery of elaborate metalworking facilities, imported luxury goods, and monumental architecture at barbarian sites has forced fundamental reassessment of assumptions about technological and cultural capabilities. The Staffordshire Hoard, discovered in 2009, exemplifies the revolutionary impact of modern archaeological discoveries on understanding barbarian material culture. This collection of over 3,500 gold and silver artefacts from the 7th century AD demonstrates metalworking techniques of extraordinary sophistication, with intricate filigree work, complex geometric patterns, and innovative construction methods that surpass contemporary Byzantine and Frankish craftsmanship. The hoard contains military equipment decorated with artistic motifs that reveal deep cultural connections between Anglo-Saxon England and Scandinavian traditions, contradicting previous assumptions about cultural isolation and technological backwardness among barbarian peoples. Archaeological investigations of barbarian settlement patterns have revealed urban development and territorial organisation that challenges traditional distinctions between civilized and primitive societies. The oppidum of Manching in Bavaria covered over 380 hectares and housed an estimated 10,000 inhabitants during the 2nd century BC, making it larger than many contemporary Roman cities. Excavations have uncovered evidence of planned street layouts, specialised craft quarters, standardised coinage, and defensive systems that required sophisticated engineering knowledge and coordinated labour organisation. The presence of Mediterranean imports, alongside locally produced goods, demonstrates extensive commercial networks that connected Celtic territories with distant markets throughout Europe and beyond. The reinterpretation of barbarian burial practices through modern archaeological methods has revealed social hierarchies and cultural practices far more complex than previously understood. The ship burial at Sutton Hoo, excavated using techniques unavailable to earlier archaeologists, demonstrates the sophisticated ceremonial traditions and international connections that characterized Anglo-Saxon royal culture. The burial contained artifacts from across Europe and beyond, including Byzantine silver, Frankish coins, Swedish metalwork, and locally produced items that reveal the extensive diplomatic and commercial networks maintained by 7th century English kingdoms. Advances in archaeological science have enabled detailed analysis of barbarian technologies that reveals innovation and adaptation rather than primitive imitation of Roman methods. Metallurgical analysis of Germanic weapons has demonstrated sophisticated understanding of steel production, heat treatment, and alloy composition that produce blades superior to contemporary Roman military equipment. Pattern-welded swords found in barbarian graves show evidence of techniques that required generations of experimental development and represented technological achievements independent of Mediterranean influence. These discoveries have forced recognition that barbarian societies possess their own traditions of technical innovation, rather than simply copying Roman methods. The application of environmental archaeology to barbarian sites has revealed agricultural and economic systems of remarkable sophistication that supported dense populations and complex societies. Pollen analysis from Germanic settlements shows evidence of systematic forest management, crop rotation, and selective breeding programs that maximized agricultural productivity while maintaining ecological sustainability. The discovery of extensive field systems, storage facilities, and processing installations demonstrates planning capabilities and resource management that contradicts traditional assumptions about barbarian economic primitiveness. DNA analysis and genetic research have revolutionized understanding of barbarian migration patterns, ethnic identity, and cultural exchange through scientific evidence that challenges fundamental assumptions about ancient European populations. Genetic studies of modern European populations reveal complex patterns of ancestry that contradict simple models of barbarian invasion and replacement of Roman populations. Instead, the evidence suggests extensive intermarriage, gradual population movement, and cultural assimilation that created hybrid societies rather than the ethnic replacement described in traditional historical narratives. The analysis of ancient DNA extracted from barbarian burials has provided direct evidence about population movements and ethnic relationships that contradicts many assumptions based on archaeological and linguistic evidence alone. Studies of migration period cemeteries reveal genetic diversity within supposedly homogeneous barbarian groups, while demonstrating unexpected connections between geographically distant populations. The presence of individuals with Mediterranean ancestry in Germanic cemeteries and Northern European genetic markers in Italian burials suggests population movements and cultural exchange far more complex than traditional migration narratives would indicate. Isotope analysis of barbarian skeletal remains has provided new insights into individual mobility and cultural identity that challenge assumptions about tribal solidarity and territorial boundaries. Studies of tooth enamel and bone chemistry reveal that many individuals buried in barbarian cemeteries had spent significant portions of their lives in regions far from their final resting places, suggesting mobility patterns and cultural flexibility that contradict models of fixed tribal territories and ethnic boundaries. These discoveries demonstrate that barbarian societies were characterized by individual mobility and cultural adaptability rather than the rigid tribal structures described in classical sources. The development of new historical methodologies has enabled more sophisticated analysis of written sources that reveals the extent of classical bias and distortion in barbarian descriptions. Comparative analysis of Greek and Roman ethnographic writing demonstrates systematic patterns of stereotyping and cultural prejudice that shape descriptions of barbarian peoples according to preconceived categories rather than actual observation. The recognition of these biases has forced fundamental reassessment of classical sources and greater reliance on archaeological evidence for understanding barbarian societies. Linguistic analysis using modern computational methods has revealed the complexity of ancient European language relationships and cultural exchange that contradicts simple models of ethnic replacement and cultural conquest. The survival of pre-Indo-European substrate languages in regions supposedly conquered by barbarian peoples suggests cultural continuity and population mixing rather than complete replacement. The extensive borrowing between Germanic, Celtic, and Romance languages demonstrates ongoing cultural contact and mutual influence that created hybrid linguistic traditions throughout post-Roman Europe. The study of barbarian legal traditions through comparative analysis has revealed sophisticated jurisprudential concepts and administrative practices that influenced European legal development for centuries. Germanic law codes demonstrate understanding of property rights, criminal procedure, and judicial authority that adapted traditional customs to complex territorial states while preserving essential cultural values. The influence of barbarian legal concepts on medieval European law extended far beyond simple preservation of Germanic customs to encompass fundamental principles of governance and social organisation. The lasting impact of barbarian peoples on European languages reflects the extent of their cultural influence on medieval and modern European civilization. Germanic languages provided the foundation for English, German, Dutch, and Scandinavian linguistic traditions, while contributing substantial vocabulary to Romance languages throughout former barbarian territories. The persistence of Germanic legal terminology, military concepts, and social institutions in modern European languages demonstrates the profound influence of barbarian culture on European development despite centuries of political and religious transformation. Germanic legal concepts fundamentally shaped European approaches to property rights, individual liberty, and governmental authority through institutions that balanced royal power with traditional rights and local autonomy. The principle of consent in governance, preserved in Germanic assemblies and adapted to medieval parliamentary institutions, provided alternatives to absolute monarchy that influenced constitutional development throughout Europe. The concept of individual rights protected by customary law rather than royal grace created legal traditions that distinguished European political development from other world civilizations. The barbarian emphasis on personal loyalty and contractual obligation provided the foundation for feudal relationships that governed European society for centuries, while creating political structures that balanced central authority with local autonomy. The transformation of Germanic comitatus traditions into feudal contracts preserved concepts of mutual obligation and limited authority that prevented the development of absolute despotism while maintaining social hierarchy and military effectiveness. These institutional innovations created political systems capable of governing complex territorial states while preserving individual rights and local traditions. Barbarian military traditions profoundly influenced European warfare through tactical innovations, weapons technology, and concepts of military honour that shaped medieval chivalric culture. The Germanic emphasis on individual combat prowess within collective tactical frameworks created military traditions that balance personal achievement with unit cohesion. The development of heavy cavalry from barbarian warrior bands established military systems that dominated European battlefields for centuries, while creating social institutions that connected military service with political authority. The architectural legacy of barbarian peoples extended beyond simple construction techniques to encompass concepts of space, ceremony, and community organisation that influenced European building traditions throughout the medieval period. Germanic hall construction provided models for royal and aristocratic residences that emphasised communal gathering and ceremonial display rather than private luxury or defensive isolation. The integration of barbarian architectural concepts with Roman construction techniques created hybrid building traditions that characterised medieval European architecture. while preserving cultural values regarding community, authority, and social hierarchy. Barbarian artistic traditions contributed essential elements to European cultural development through decorative styles, narrative techniques, and aesthetic principles that influenced medieval art, literature, and material culture. The animal style that characterized Germanic metalwork provided decorative motifs that appeared throughout medieval European art while demonstrating sophisticated understanding of design principles and symbolic representation. The preservation of barbarian oral traditions in medieval literature created narrative frameworks and heroic ideals that influenced European cultural development for centuries. The religious synthesis that emerged from barbarian conversion to Christianity created distinctive European forms of religious practice and theological understanding that balance Christian doctrine with traditional cultural values. The adaptation of Christian liturgy, architecture, and ceremonial practice to barbarian cultural preferences created religious traditions that differed significantly from Mediterranean Christianity while maintaining doctrinal orthodoxy. These synthetic religious traditions provided cultural foundations for a medieval European civilization while preserving essential elements of barbarian cultural identity within Christian frameworks. The reassessment of barbarian history through modern archaeological, genetic, and linguistic research has revealed the extent to which these peoples contributed to European civilization through cultural innovation, technological development, and institutional creation rather than simple destruction of classical traditions. The recognition of barbarian achievements requires abandonment of classical prejudices and romantic distortions that have obscured the complex realities of cultural interaction, population movement, and political transformation that characterized the transition from ancient to medieval Europe. The legacy of barbarian peoples extends far beyond their role in the collapse of Roman imperial authority to encompass fundamental contributions to European political, legal, cultural, and social development that shaped the trajectory of Western civilization. Their influence on European languages, laws, customs, and political structures demonstrates the extent to which barbarian cultural traditions provided essential foundations for medieval and modern European society. The transformation of barbarian tribal confederations into territorial kingdoms established governmental institutions and cultural practices that influenced European development for over a millennium while creating the political foundations for modern European states. The enduring significance of barbarian history lies not in romantic mythologies about primitive virtue or racial superiority, but in the remarkable achievement of cultural synthesis that created European civilization through the integration of classical, barbarian, and Christian traditions. This synthesis required centuries of experimentation, adaptation, and innovation that produced entirely new forms of political organization, legal procedure, religious practice, and cultural expression. The barbarian contribution to this achievement deserves recognition as one of history's most successful examples of cultural transformation and institutional innovation, creating the foundations for European civilization while preserving essential human values regarding individual dignity, community responsibility, and cultural continuity that continue to influence world development today.